Welcome, weary wanderer, to the peculiar universe of Elmore, where the impossible becomes mundane and chaos masquerades as everyday life. Tonight, we shall traverse the complete chronology of the Watterson family and their extraordinary world, from the cosmic origins of their reality to the final moments of their animated existence. This is a tale of a blue cat, his adoptive goldfish brother, and the delightfully absurd community that surrounds them. So settle into comfort, let your thoughts drift like dandelion seeds on a gentle breeze, and allow us to explore this realm where logic bends and wonder never truly ends. In the beginning, before there was laughter echoing through suburban streets, before there were blue cats chasing impossible dreams or goldfish learning to walk on legs they had never possessed, there existed something far more mysterious and profound than the colourful chaos we have come to know. This was the void, not merely an absence of things, but a presence unto itself, a realm of forgotten possibilities that stretched beyond the boundaries of conventional reality like an ocean of crystallized silence. The void was not empty in the way that most minds comprehend emptiness. It was filled instead with the echoes of things that had never quite managed to exist, characters who had been sketched but never animated, stories that had been imagined but never told. Here, in this space between spaces, dwelt those who had been deemed unworthy of full existence, beings whose narrative purpose had been deemed insufficient to warrant the precious gift of animated life. It was in this liminal realm that we first encounter one who would later become central to our tale, a figure known simply as Rob, though his true nature was far more complex than any name could encompass. Rob existed in that peculiar state of being that defines the forgotten, neither fully real nor completely imaginary, suspended in a twilight of potential that stretched across dimensions that more fortunate souls would never need to contemplate. The void operated according to laws that defied the comfortable logic of the animated world beyond its borders. Time moved differently here, not in the measured beats of narrative progression, but in the slow, patient rhythms of entropy and possibility. Those who found themselves cast into this realm discovered that memory became fluid, identity negotiable, and purpose, something that had to be constantly redefined in the absence of external validation. Yet even in this place of forgotten dreams, there existed artifacts of tremendous power, objects that had been created in moments of pure narrative necessity and then abandoned when their stories moved in different directions. Chief among these was the universal remote, a device of such cosmic significance that its very existence threatened the fundamental structure of animated reality. The universal remote was not merely a tool for changing channels or adjusting volume, though it could certainly accomplish such mundane tasks with ease. It was instead a crystallization of pure narrative control, a device that could alter the very fabric of storytelling itself. In the hands of someone who understood its true nature, it could rewrite causality, reshape character development, and restructure the basic laws that governed how animated beings interacted with their world. When this device found its way into the world beyond the void, carried by forces and circumstances that even now remain shrouded in mystery, it triggered a cascade of reality-altering events that would reshape the very nature of existence in the town of Elmore. The remote's power was not subtle or gentle. It was the kind of force that could make Monday follow Sunday indefinitely, that could cause characters to age backwards or sideways, that could turn tragic moments into comedic ones with the simple press of a button. But the universal remote was merely one artifact among many that had emerged from the intersection of imagination and abandonment. The awesome store, that seemingly mundane retail establishment that would later become central to so many of our characters' adventures, had its origins in this same cosmic uncertainty. The store existed as a nexus point where discarded possibilities could be purchased for reasonable prices, where the impossible became available for immediate delivery. The proprietor of this establishment, though calling him a proprietor, hardly does justice to the cosmic role he would come to play, was a being whose existence stretched across multiple realities and infinite responsibilities. Larry Needlemeyer was not merely an employee, but a guardian of possibilities, a custodian of the discarded dreams that found their way into commercial availability. Larry's omnipresence throughout Elmore was not coincidence but necessity. He existed simultaneously in every role that required filling, every job that needed doing, every position that demanded occupancy. This was not the result of economic hardship or ambitious work ethic, but rather a fundamental aspect of how reality maintained its stability in a world where logic and consistency were perpetually under assault. The awesome store served as more than just a retail establishment. It functioned as a release valve for narrative pressure, a place where potentially universe-threatening artifacts could be safely contained within the familiar context of consumer capitalism. Here, weapons of mass destruction shared shelf space with household cleaning supplies. Reality-altering devices were filed next to conventional electronics, and cosmic horrors were marked down for clearance alongside seasonal merchandise. As these cosmic forces swirled and stabilized, as the fundamental laws of animated existence solidified into something approaching consistency, the stage was set for the emergence of a community that would become legendary for its ability to survive the impossible. Elmore did not simply spring into existence like most towns. It coalesced gradually from the collective unconscious needs of its future inhabitants, taking shape according to the requirements of stories that had not yet been told, but were already demanding venues for their unfolding. The town's geography defied conventional urban planning principles, with residential neighborhoods flowing seamlessly into commercial districts, which in turn opened onto educational facilities that served communities scattered across impossible distances. Roads curved in directions that maps could not accurately represent, while buildings maintained architectural styles that suggested influences from across time and space. Elmore Junior High School emerged as the gravitational center around which the rest of the community organized itself, though the reasons for this centralization would not become apparent until much later in our tale. The school was more than an educational institution. It was a nexus point where the various threads of reality converged, where young minds encountered their first taste of the profound weirdness that characterized existence in this particular corner of the universe. The establishment of the school system represented the community's first formal acknowledgement that the normal rules of education would prove inadequate for preparing students to navigate their extraordinary circumstances. Traditional subjects like mathematics and literature would be taught alongside more specialized courses in cartoon physics, reality management, and interdimensional etiquette. The faculty would be drawn from across the spectrum of animated existence, representing species and backgrounds that conventional educators might find challenging to accommodate. Principal Nigel Brown assumed leadership of this institution not through conventional administrative channels, but through a complex series of events that involved temporary insanity, recovering sanity, and the kind of bureaucratic confusion that only becomes possible when dealing with supernatural phenomena on a regular basis. His relationship with Miss Lucy Simeon, the school's veteran teacher, whose age and experience stretched back to geological epochs, would become one of the defining dynamics of the educational environment. Miss Simeon represented the old school of education in the most literal sense possible. She had been teaching since before the current definition of teaching had been established, her methods shaped by centuries of experience with students who challenged every assumption about what learning could accomplish. Her antagonistic relationship with the Watterson family, particularly with young Gumball, would become the stuff of legend, though the deeper motivations behind her seemingly cruel behavior remained hidden beneath layers of professional disappointment and existential weariness. The student body that would eventually populate these halls represented a cross-section of animated diversity that defied simple categorization. Here, anthropomorphic animals would study alongside living food items, while geometric shapes shared classrooms with supernatural entities and technological constructs developed friendships with biological organisms that conventional science insisted were impossible. This was the world that awaited the arrival of the Watterson family, a reality where the impossible had become routine, where chaos masqueraded as order, and where the deepest truths about existence could be discovered through the simple act of surviving another school day. The cosmic foundations had been laid, the stage prepared, and the universe held its breath in anticipation of the arrival of characters who would push every boundary and challenge every assumption about what animated life could accomplish. Time itself operated differently in this nascent reality, flowing not in the steady progression that marked conventional existence, but in the episodic rhythms that governed serialized storytelling. Cause and effect maintained their relationship, but it was a relationship characterized by flexibility and creative interpretation, rather than rigid adherence to logical progression. Events could have consequences that preceded their causes. Character development could occur in reverse, and the lessons learned in one adventure could be completely forgotten by the beginning of the next, without anyone questioning the inconsistency. This temporal fluidity was not a flaw in the system, but a feature, designed to ensure that growth and change could coexist with the eternal present tense that defines animated existence. Characters would be free to evolve and develop while simultaneously remaining fundamentally unchanged, allowing for both the satisfaction of progression and the comfort of consistency that audiences craved. The establishment of these cosmic foundations represented more than mere world building. It was the creation of a reality where love could triumph over logic, where family bonds could survive any catastrophe, and where the most profound truths could be discovered through the seemingly simple act of getting through another day in the company of those who matter most. The universe of Elmore was ready to receive its most important inhabitants, prepared to nurture their growth while challenging them with adventures that would test every assumption about what it means to exist in a world where anything is possible. As the final pieces of this reality fell into place, as the last cosmic adjustments were made to accommodate the particular brand of chaos that was about to descend upon this peaceful community, the stage was set for the arrival of a blue cat whose innocent desire to simply live his life would trigger adventures that would reshape the very nature of animated existence. The foundations were solid, the possibilities infinite, and the universe itself waited with barely contained anticipation for the moment when ordinary suburban life would be transformed into something extraordinary through the simple presence of the Watterson family. In the mists of time that preceded the great convergence of chaos and wonder we have come to associate with the Watterson household, there existed two separate lineages, whose eventual union would prove to be one of the most cosmically significant events in the history of animated existence. These were not bloodlines in any conventional sense, for the rules of genetics operate according to different principles in a universe where love can literally reshape biology and where the power of belief can alter fundamental characteristics of identity and form. The Watterson name itself carried within it a legacy of magnificent incompetence that stretched back through generations of well-meaning individuals whose every attempt to impose order upon their circumstances resulted in increasingly elaborate forms of beautiful disaster. This was not mere clumsiness or lack of intelligence, though both qualities were certainly present in abundance throughout the family tree. Rather, It was as if the universe itself conspired to ensure that any Watterson who attempted to live a normal, predictable life would find themselves swept up in adventures that defied every assumption about what normal life was supposed to entail. Richard Buckley Watterson emerged from this noble lineage of chaos like a flower blooming in particularly fertile soil, his every characteristic perfectly calibrated to represent the family's finest traditions of loving incompetence and well-intentioned disaster. From his earliest moments of consciousness, Richard displayed an almost supernatural ability to find the most complicated possible solution to any problem, to discover hidden difficulties in situations that others considered straightforward, and to transform routine activities into epic adventures through the simple application of his unique perspective on how reality was supposed to function. The household in which Richard spent his formative years was presided over by his mother Joanna, a woman whose own relationship with conventional reality was tenuous at best, but whose love for her son burned with the intensity of a small star. Joanna Watterson possessed the kind of maternal devotion that could manifest as physical force when necessary, combined with a worldview so fundamentally optimistic that it bordered on the hallucinogenic. She saw in her son not the walking disaster that others might perceive, but a young man of infinite potential, whose every failure was simply another opportunity for creative problem-solving. Alongside Richard in this nurturing environment of controlled chaos lived his sister Granny Jojo, though their relationship transcended the simple bonds of siblinghood to become something approaching a cosmic partnership in the art of surviving impossible circumstances, where Richard's approach to life was characterized by enthusiastic incompetence. Granny Jojo brought a more methodical form of chaos to their shared adventures, her schemes and plans serving as the perfect complement to her brother's ability to stumble into extraordinary situations through sheer accident. The Watterson household operated according to principles that conventional families might find challenging to understand. Meals were prepared through processes that combined traditional cooking with interpretive dance and wishful thinking. Household chores were approached with the kind of creative problem-solving typically associated with experimental engineering projects. Educational activities blended conventional learning with hands-on experiments in applied physics that frequently resulted in property damage and occasionally required intervention from local emergency services. Richard's formal education, such as it was, took place in the same institutions that would later shape his own children's understanding of how learning was supposed to function in a world where logic served merely as a starting point for more interesting possibilities. His academic performance was notable primarily for its consistency. He approached every subject with the same enthusiastic incomprehension that he brought to all other aspects of life, transforming mathematics into interpretive art, literature into personal mythology, and physical education into a form of performance poetry that somehow managed to violate several laws of physics while simultaneously demonstrating previously unknown applications of cartoon logic. His teachers, a diverse collection of individuals who had learned through hard experience that conventional pedagogical approaches were inadequate for students whose very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about how education was supposed to work, developed specialized techniques for nurturing Richard's unique gifts, while simultaneously protecting the school infrastructure from the collateral damage that inevitably accompanied his learning process. These educators understood that Richard's apparent inability to master traditional subjects masked a deeper intelligence that operated according to principles that transcended conventional academic categories. The social environment in which Richard matured was one where difference was not merely tolerated but celebrated as essential to the community's continued survival and growth. His classmates represented a cross-section of animated diversity that included sentient food items, geometric shapes with personality disorders, supernatural entities working through adolescent identity issues, and various forms of anthropomorphic life that had learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of integrated education. In this environment, Richard's particular brand of chaos was not aberrant, but simply another note in the symphony of controlled disorder that characterized daily life. It was during his final years of formal education that Richard encountered the individual who would prove to be his perfect complement, his ideal partner in the grand adventure of existence, and the one person in the universe capable of loving him, not despite his chaos, but because of the beautiful impossibility that he represented in every moment of every day. Nicole Watterson, though she bore a different name in those days, a name that carried within it the echoes of her own extraordinary origins, existed as a force of nature disguised as a high school student. Where Richard embodied the creative chaos of unlimited possibility, Nicole represented the focused fury of absolute determination, channeled through supernatural competence, and filtered through a heart that beat with the rhythm of protective love made manifest in physical form. Nicole's childhood had unfolded in circumstances that were extraordinary even by the standards of a universe where the extraordinary had become commonplace. She had spent her earliest years in the Rainbow Factory, that mysterious industrial facility where emotions were processed into their visible components, and beauty was manufactured through processes that combined advanced chemistry with pure artistic inspiration. The factory was not merely a workplace, but a realm unto itself, where the fundamental forces that governed how feelings could be transformed into color operated according to principles that existed at the intersection of science, magic, and industrial production. The Rainbow Factory operated under the supervision of beings whose understanding of emotional architecture transcended normal psychological categories. These supervisors, for calling them managers, would hardly do justice to their cosmic responsibilities. Understood that the production of visible beauty required more than mere technical expertise. It demanded workers whose own emotional lives were sufficiently complex and powerful to serve as raw material for the transformation process. Individuals whose personal experiences contained the full spectrum of human feeling necessary to create rainbows that could bring joy to observers across multiple dimensions of existence. Young Nicole thrived in this environment with an intensity that amazed even the factory's most experienced supervisors. Her natural emotional range was so vast and her processing capacity so remarkable that she could single-handedly produce color combinations that required teams of ordinary workers to accomplish. Her rainbows possessed qualities that transcended mere visual beauty they carried within them. Emotional resonances that could lift spirits, heal hearts, and inspire hope in observers who had forgotten what it felt like to believe in possibilities beyond their immediate circumstances. Yet this extraordinary productivity came at a cost that would not become apparent until years later, when the accumulated pressure of channeling such intense emotions on a daily basis began to transform Nicole's fundamental nature in ways that would have profound implications for her future and the future of all those who would come to depend upon her strength and protection. The Rainbow Factory's work environment, despite its colorful output, was characterized by pressures and demands that would have broken lesser spirits. The production quotas were not merely numerical targets, but cosmic imperatives. The universe itself depended upon a steady supply of properly processed emotions to maintain the delicate balance between hope and despair that kept reality stable and functional. Workers who failed to meet their assigned responsibilities were not simply fired, but could literally cause sectors of existence to lose their capacity for beauty. leaving entire regions of reality trapped in shades of grey that reflected the emotional emptiness of inadequate rainbow production. Under these circumstances, Nicole developed the supernatural abilities that would later make her legendary among parents facing the impossible task of raising children in a world where chaos was not merely possible but inevitable. Her reflexes became so finely tuned that she could react to threats that had not yet fully materialized. Her strength grew to proportions that allowed her to lift objects that should have been immovable and to overcome obstacles that should have been insurmountable. Most importantly, her capacity for protective fury expanded to levels that bordered on the divine, transforming her love for others into a force that could literally reshape physical reality when circumstances demanded intervention. The transformation from joyful rainbow factory worker to supernatural guardian was not instantaneous, but gradual, occurring across years of accumulated stress and responsibility that slowly wore away the softer aspects of Nicole's personality while amplifying the harder elements that would prove essential for survival in the challenges that lay ahead. By the time she reached her final years of formal education, she had become someone who could face down entire bureaucratic organizations, negotiate with cosmic entities, and single-handedly reorganize the fundamental structure of any system that threatened the well-being of those she considered part of her protective responsibility. It was in the hallways of their shared educational institution that Nicole first encountered Richard, though their initial meeting was hardly the stuff of romantic legend. Richard had managed to trigger some form of minor catastrophe involving the school's experimental physics laboratory, a collection of borrowed kitchen equipment, and what appeared to be a localized weather system that was raining chocolate pudding in defiance of several fundamental laws of meteorology. Nicole's first impression of this blue cat, who seemed to exist in a constant state of cheerful disaster, was not romantic attraction, but professional concern. Here was clearly someone who would require constant supervision to prevent him from accidentally destroying himself, his immediate environment, and possibly several surrounding dimensions through the simple act of existing with his characteristic enthusiasm. Yet something in Richard's absolute sincerity, his complete lack of pretense or hidden agenda, his utterly transparent joy in simply being alive and sharing that aliveness with anyone willing to pay attention, gradually worked its way past Nicole's carefully constructed defenses and touched something deep within her that had been protected for so long that she had almost forgotten its existence. Here was someone who needed protection not from external threats but from his own capacity for generating impossible situations. Someone whose very helplessness called forth all of her most powerful protective instincts, while simultaneously offering her something she had never experienced, the freedom to relax her constant vigilance and simply enjoy the beautiful absurdity of existence as experienced through Richard's uniquely optimistic perspective. Their courtship unfolded according to patterns that romantic literature had never quite prepared the world to understand. Traditional dating activities became epic adventures when filtered through Richard's gift for discovering hidden complexities in straightforward situations, while Nicole's supernatural competence transformed potential disasters into opportunities for demonstrating the kind of problem-solving skills that would make action heroes weep with envy. A simple dinner date might evolve into a quest to rescue an entire restaurant from the consequences of Richard's attempt to help with food preparation, while a quiet evening walk could become a city-wide adventure requiring Nicole to negotiate with municipal authorities, local wildlife, and various manifestations of cartoon physics that had gotten out of hand through no one's particular fault. Yet, beneath the chaos and the constant need for creative crisis management, a deeper connection developed between them that transcended the surface complications of their vastly different approaches to existing in the world. Nicole discovered that Richard's apparent incompetence masked a profound wisdom about what truly mattered in life: love, family, joy, and the courage to face each day with hope, despite the certainty that something would probably go wrong before noon. Richard, in turn, found in Nicole not just a protector and problem solver, but someone whose fierce dedication to those she loved gave meaning and direction to his own existence, transforming his random chaos into purposeful adventure and his scattered energy into focused devotion. Their engagement was announced through a series of events that would have provided material for several epic poems, had there been poets brave enough to attempt capturing the cosmic implications of their union. The proposal itself involved a misunderstanding about restaurant protocols, a case of mistaken identity that somehow convinced an entire wedding party that Richard was their intended groom, and Nicole's characteristic approach to problem solving, which involved taking charge of the situation with such overwhelming competence that reality itself simply rearranged to accommodate her preferences, rather than risk contradicting her determination. The wedding ceremony that followed was a celebration that brought together representatives from every corner of their extraordinary community, creating a gathering that served as both romantic culmination and scientific experiment in the practical limits of how much concentrated weirdness a single location could contain before achieving some form of critical mass. The guest list included Nicole's former supervisors from the Rainbow Factory, whose attendance required special atmospheric adjustments to prevent their emotional intensity from accidentally triggering weather phenomena. Richard's extended family contributed their own unique challenges, as several relatives possessed the ability to alter local probability fields through the simple act of existing in the same space as other people. The ceremony itself proceeded with the kind of beautiful disaster that had become the signature of any event involving the convergence of multiple sources of concentrated chaos. The wedding cake achieved temporary sentience and attempted to officiate its own consumption. The floral arrangement spontaneously evolved into a small ecosystem that required ongoing diplomatic negotiations to prevent territorial conflicts. The musical entertainment, provided by a combination of professional performers and enthusiastic amateurs, created harmonies that temporarily opened small portals to adjacent dimensions, allowing wedding guests from across the multiverse to attend via interdimensional video conferencing. Yet through all the chaos and impossibility, through all the complications that arose from attempting to blend the focused intensity of Nicole's approach to life with the scattered enthusiasm of Richard's worldview, the essential truth of their connection remained clear and unshakable. They loved each other with the kind of complete, unreserved devotion that could serve as the foundation for adventures that would span decades and challenge every assumption about what a family was supposed to be capable of accomplishing when unified by bonds that transcended mere biological relationship. Their honeymoon became the stuff of local legend, involving several forms of transportation that had not previously been tested for romantic applications, accommodations that required ongoing negotiations with the local laws of physics, and a series of adventures that tested their newly formalized partnership in ways that conventional marriage preparation courses had never quite addressed. By the time they returned from their travels, they had established patterns of cooperation and mutual support that would serve them well in the challenges that lay ahead, challenges that would require every bit of Nicole's supernatural competence and Richard's creative chows, combined with a love strong enough to hold their family together through adventures that would push the very boundaries of what animated existence could contain. The household they established together was a perfect synthesis of their complementary strengths and weaknesses, a domestic environment where Nicole's organizational skills provided structure that could contain Richard's tendency toward creative disaster, while his optimistic approach to problem solving helped her maintain perspective during moments when her protective instincts threatened to overwhelm her capacity for patience. Their home became a sanctuary where impossible things were treated as routine occurrences, where love expressed itself through practical action as much as emotional declaration, and where the stage was set for the arrival of children who would inherit the best qualities of both parents while adding their own unique contributions to the family's growing legend. The years of their early marriage were marked by a series of adventures that served as preparation for the greater challenges that awaited them. Experiences that taught them how to work together as a team while maintaining their individual identities and preserving the qualities that had drawn them together in the first place. They learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of their community, where being normal was considered unusual, and where their particular brand of loving chaos fits seamlessly into the larger tapestry of controlled disorder that characterized daily life in Elmore. As they settled into the rhythm of married life, as they established routines that could accommodate both Nicole's need for structure and Richard's gift for discovering new possibilities in familiar activities, the universe itself seemed to pause in anticipation of what would come next. The foundation had been laid, the partnership established, and the stage prepared for the arrival of the next generation children who would inherit their parents' extraordinary gifts while adding their own unique talents to the growing legend of the Watterson family name. In the quiet moments that precede the arrival of new life, when the universe holds its breath in anticipation of souls who will reshape the very fabric of existence through their simple presence, Nicole and Richard Watterson found themselves standing at the threshold of parenthood with all the joy, terror, and complete unpreparedness that such moments demand. The cosmic forces that had brought them together, the love that had survived their chaotic courtship, and the domestic harmony they had somehow managed to establish despite their vastly different approaches to existing in the world, all of this had been mere preparation for the transformation that was about to occur. The pregnancy itself had been an adventure that challenged every assumption about how such biological processes were supposed to unfold in a universe governed by cartoon logic and animated possibility. Nicole's supernatural competence extended to her capacity for nurturing new life, while Richard's gift for discovering hidden complexities in straightforward situations ensured that even the most routine aspects of prenatal care became opportunities for creative problem-solving that frequently required intervention from medical professionals who had thought they had seen everything that animated biology could produce. Doctor visits became epic quests involving multiple forms of transportation, encounters with various manifestations of bureaucratic complexity, and Richard's characteristic ability to ask questions that revealed fundamental inconsistencies in how medical science was supposed to function in a world where the impossible happened with such regularity that it had become routine. Nicole's protective instincts, already legendary among those who knew her, amplified to cosmic proportions as she prepared to defend her unborn child from threats that existed, threats that might exist, and threats that probably did not exist, but could conceivably develop if circumstances aligned in particularly unfortunate ways. The nursery preparation became a joint project that showcased both parents' unique talents while simultaneously demonstrating their complete lack of conventional parenting experience. Nicole approached the task with the same focused intensity that had made her legendary at the Rainbow Factory, creating organizational systems that could accommodate any possible need while maintaining efficiency levels that bordered on the supernatural. Richard contributed his own gifts to the effort, discovering innovative applications for traditional baby furniture that opened up possibilities their designers had never intended. While his enthusiastic attempts to help with assembly occasionally required Nicole to demonstrate her problem-solving skills in ways that local building codes had never quite anticipated, the extended family rallied around the expectant parents with the kind of support network that could only exist in a community where everyone had learned through hard experience that raising children in their particular corner of reality required cooperative effort from all available adults. Granny Jojo brought decades of experience in creative childcare techniques, along with her own unique perspective on how children should be prepared to navigate a world where logic served merely as a starting point for more interesting possibilities. Joanna Watterson offered her maternal wisdom, which had been refined through years of raising Richard, and therefore included specialized knowledge about managing situations that conventional parenting guides had never addressed. The neighbors, that diverse collection of individuals who had learned to live in harmony despite representing every conceivable form of animated existence, prepared to welcome the newest member of their community with gifts, advice, and the kind of patient understanding that comes from experience with how quickly routine situations can evolve into extraordinary adventures when the Watterson family is involved. The local emergency services discreetly increased their staffing levels and reviewed their protocols for situations involving supernatural parenting, while the school system began preliminary discussions about how their educational approaches might need to be modified to accommodate children who had been raised in an environment where love could literally alter the laws of physics. When the day of birth finally arrived, it came with the kind of beautiful chaos that had become the signature of any major event in the Watterson family saga. The journey to the hospital became an epic adventure involving multiple detours, encounters with various forms of municipal infrastructure that had not been designed to accommodate emergency situations involving cartoon physics, and Richard's remarkable ability to remain optimistic and supportive even while simultaneously making the situation more complicated through his sincere attempts to be helpful. The medical staff, seasoned professionals who had delivered countless animated offspring, and therefore possessed specialized training in the unique challenges that such procedures could involve, found themselves facing circumstances that pushed their expertise into previously unexplored territory. Nicole's supernatural strength, when channeled through the intensity of labor, occasionally required structural reinforcements for the delivery room, while Richard's emotional responses to the unfolding miracle created localized weather phenomena that needed ongoing management to prevent them from interfering with medical procedures. Yet through all the complications and impossibilities, through all the challenges that arose from attempting to bring new life into a world where the extraordinary had become commonplace, the essential miracle of birth proceeded with the same fundamental beauty that had characterized such moments since the beginning of time itself. When their first child finally entered the world, announcing his arrival with a cry that somehow managed to express both indignation at the general state of existence and enthusiastic anticipation for all the adventures that lay ahead, Nicole and Richard found themselves holding a small blue kitten whose very presence seemed to amplify the chaotic energy that already surrounded their household. They named him Gumball, a choice that reflected both his perfectly spherical head and his parents' intuitive understanding that this child would approach life with the same kind of bouncing energy that characterized his namesake, Confection. From his first moments of consciousness, Gumball displayed an insatiable curiosity about the world around him, combined with an optimism so profound that it bordered on the supernatural and a capacity for generating complicated situations that suggested he had inherited the very best of both his parents' unique gifts. Gumball's early development proceeded at a pace that amazed even parents who had learned to expect the unexpected from every aspect of their domestic experience. His first words were not the simple syllables that most children master, but complete sentences, expressing complex philosophical concepts about the nature of existence, delivered with the kind of cheerful confidence that suggested he had been thinking about such matters for years, and was simply waiting for his vocal apparatus to develop sufficiently to share his insights with the world. His mobility, when it finally emerged, transformed the Watterson household from a sanctuary of controlled chaos into something approaching a physics laboratory where the fundamental laws of motion, gravity, and cause and effect were subjected to daily experimental testing. Gumball did not simply crawl or walk, but seemed to exist in a constant state of kinetic energy that allowed him to interact with his environment in ways that defied conventional understanding of how small children were supposed to move through space and time. Child-proofing their home became a creative challenge that required Nicole's supernatural problem-solving abilities and Richard's gift for discovering hidden complexities in apparently simple situations. Traditional safety measures proved inadequate for a child whose very presence seemed to alter the basic rules governing how household objects were supposed to function. Cabinet locks designed to prevent access somehow became launching mechanisms for impromptu engineering projects. Safety gates intended to restrict movement evolved into components of elaborate obstacle courses that transformed routine navigation into adventure sports. The community watched Gumball's early development with the kind of fascinated attention typically reserved for natural phenomena of cosmic significance. Here was clearly a child who would push every boundary, challenge every assumption, and discover possibilities that had never occurred to previous generations of young explorers. His effect on local reality was already becoming apparent. Flowers bloomed more vibrantly in his presence. Mechanical devices operated more creatively when he was nearby, and the very atmosphere seemed charged with additional possibilities whenever he entered a room. Yet even as the family adjusted to life with their extraordinary firstborn, the universe was preparing another surprise that would complete their transformation from a couple learning to navigate parenthood into a family whose bonds transcended the conventional relationships between biological relatives. In the quiet corner of Gumball's nursery, in a simple fishbowl that had been placed there as much for decoration as any practical purpose, lived a small goldfish whose own destiny was about to intersect with the Watterson family story in ways that would challenge every assumption about the boundaries between species, the nature of consciousness, and the power of love to transform the very essence of what it means to exist. The goldfish had been acquired through one of those routine decisions that parents make without fully understanding their long-term implications, a simple pet to teach their son about responsibility and the care of other living creatures. Darwin, as he came to be known, began his existence as what appeared to be an ordinary goldfish, living an ordinary aquatic life, swimming in circles, eating fish food, and providing the kind of gentle companionship that household pets have offered to human families throughout history. But Darwin's presence in the Watterson household meant that he was exposed daily to concentrations of love, chaos, and creative possibility that no goldfish in the history of animated existence had ever experienced. Gumball's affection for his pet was immediate, profound, and expressed with the kind of uninhibited emotional intensity that only very young children can achieve. The boy would spend hours at the fishbowl, sharing his thoughts and experiences with his silent companion, treating Darwin not as a simple pet, but as a friend whose opinions mattered, and whose presence was essential to his own happiness and well-being. Under the constant influence of such concentrated affection, something remarkable began to occur within Darwin's simple consciousness. The boundaries between species that conventional biology insisted were absolute began to blur under the pressure of emotional connection that transcended normal categories of relationship. Darwin's awareness expanded beyond the simple stimulus-response patterns that typically governed goldfish behavior, developing complexity and depth that reflected his constant exposure to the family's extraordinary emotional environment. The transformation was gradual at first, so subtle that even Nicole's supernatural observational abilities almost missed the early signs. Darwin's swimming patterns became more purposeful, his responses to external stimuli more sophisticated, his apparent attention span longer and more focused. He began to display preferences that suggested individual personality rather than simple biological programming, showing interest in particular activities while demonstrating what appeared to be boredom with others. As weeks turned to months, Darwin's development accelerated in ways that challenged every assumption about the fixed nature of biological form and function. His gills began to adapt to process air as well as water, while his fins developed strength and flexibility that allowed for increasingly complex manipulation of his environment. Most remarkably, his consciousness expanded to encompass language comprehension and eventually language production, though the mechanisms by which a goldfish could generate human speech remained mysterious even to those who witnessed the phenomenon daily. The family's reaction to Darwin's evolution was characteristic of their approach to all extraordinary developments in their domestic life. They accepted it as simply another manifestation of the beautiful impossibility that defined their existence together. Richard's response was pure joy at the prospect of gaining another family member, while Nicole's protective instincts immediately expanded to encompass this new being, who had somehow become their son through the sheer power of mutual affection. Gumball's relationship with Darwin transcended the traditional pet-owner dynamic to become something approaching a brotherhood that existed beyond the boundaries of species or conventional relationship categories. They were companions in the truest sense, united by bonds of affection that had literally transformed the nature of their existence and would continue to shape their adventures throughout all the years that lay ahead. Yet even as the family celebrated the miracle of Darwin's transformation, the universe was preparing to complete their household with the arrival of one final member whose own extraordinary gifts would balance and complement those of her parents and siblings. Nicole's second pregnancy proceeded with the same beautiful chaos that had characterized her first, though by now both parents possessed enough experience with animated reproduction to navigate the challenges with slightly more confidence and considerably more preparation. The anticipation surrounding their third child's arrival was colored by the family's growing understanding of their own extraordinary nature. They had learned through experience that nothing in their household proceeded according to conventional expectations, that love could literally reshape biological reality, and that their children would inevitably possess gifts that would challenge every assumption about what young minds and hearts could accomplish when nurtured in an environment of unlimited support and creative possibility. When Anais finally entered the world, she arrived with a dignity and composure that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding her birth. While her parents and older brother represented various forms of enthusiastic disorder, the newest member of the Watterson family displayed from her earliest moments a calm intelligence that suggested she had been observing the situation for some time and had developed clear opinions about how things should be managed more efficiently. Unlike her older brother, whose development had proceeded through stages of increasingly elaborate physical comedy, Anais demonstrated intellectual capacities that emerged fully formed, as if she had simply been waiting for her neural pathways to develop sufficiently to express concepts that she had been contemplating since conception. Her first words were not simple expressions of need or recognition, but sophisticated observations about the inefficiencies she had noticed in family routines, delivered with the kind of patient clarity that suggested she understood that others might require time to appreciate the wisdom of her suggestions. The family dynamics shifted once again to accommodate this new presence, whose approach to existence was so fundamentally different from those of her relatives, yet perfectly complementary to their various strengths and weaknesses. While Gumball and Darwin brought enthusiasm and creativity to any situation, Anais contributed analytical thinking and strategic planning that could transform their spontaneous adventures into actually achievable goals. Her intellectual development proceeded at a pace that amazed even parents who had learned to expect the extraordinary from their offspring. By the time she could walk, she was reading books that challenged advanced students, solving mathematical problems that perplexed her elders, and demonstrating understanding of scientific principles that suggested her education was proceeding according to internal schedules rather than external curricula. Yet for all her intellectual precocity, Aeneas remained fundamentally a child whose emotional needs were no different from those of any young person growing up in a family where love expressed itself through practical action as much as verbal affirmation. She needed the security of knowing that her parents would protect her, the companionship of siblings who accepted her unique gifts without resentment, and the freedom to explore her extraordinary capabilities in an environment where being different was considered a strength rather than a source of concern. The Watterson family had achieved its final configuration, a perfect synthesis of complementary gifts and personalities that would prove capable of surviving any adventure and overcoming any challenge through the combined application of Richard's creative chaos, Nicole's supernatural competence, Gumball's enthusiastic optimism, Darwin's loyal friendship, and Aeneas's strategic intelligence. Together, they represented a force for beautiful disorder that would reshape their community's understanding of what families could accomplish when united by bonds of love that transcended conventional categories and expectations. Their household had become a sanctuary where the impossible was routine, where individual differences were celebrated as contributions to collective strength, and where every day brought new opportunities to discover just how far the boundaries of animated existence could be pushed by hearts brave enough to embrace the beautiful absurdity that defined their shared adventure through life. The stage was now set for the epic adventures that would make the Watterson family legendary throughout their community and beyond. Adventures that would test every assumption about what love could accomplish and demonstrate that even in a universe governed by chaos, the bonds between family members could serve as an anchor strong enough to weather any storm and flexible enough to adapt to any circumstance that the extraordinary demands of their existence might require. As the seasons cycled through their eternal dance of renewal and transformation, as the Watterson family grew into the magnificent constellation of chaos and love that would define their legendary status within the community, the time arrived for their children to venture beyond the protective sanctuary of home and enter the broader world of formal education. This transition, which for most families represents a simple milestone in the natural progression of childhood development, would prove for the Wattersons to be the beginning of adventures that would challenge every assumption about what educational institutions were designed to accomplish and how young minds were supposed to interact with structured learning environments. Elmore Junior High School stood like a monument to optimistic architectural ambition in the heart of their community, its brick walls and institutional corridors bearing witness to decades of educational experiments that had tested every theory about how diverse populations of animated beings could be successfully integrated into coherent learning communities. The building itself seemed to pulse with the accumulated energy of countless young minds who had passed through its halls, each bringing their own unique gifts and challenges to the ongoing project of collective intellectual development. The institution had evolved over the years into something far more complex and extraordinary than its original planners had ever envisioned. What had begun as a conventional educational facility, designed to serve a relatively homogeneous population of suburban students, had gradually transformed into a nexus point where the fundamental laws governing how different forms of consciousness could coexist and collaborate were tested daily through practical application rather than theoretical speculation. At the administrative heart of this extraordinary institution presided Principal Nigel Brown, a man whose journey to educational leadership had been marked by experiences that would have broken lesser spirits, but had instead forged him into someone capable of maintaining order and purpose in an environment where chaos was not merely possible, but inevitable. His path to the principal's office had involved temporary insanity, miraculous recovery, bureaucratic confusion, and the kind of cosmic coincidences that suggested the universe itself had been instrumental in placing him in a position where his particular combination of patience, creativity, and supernatural resilience would be most needed. Principal Brown approached his responsibilities with the same mixture of professional competence and barely controlled panic that characterized all successful administrators in educational environments where the student body included sentient food items, geometric shapes with authority issues, supernatural entities working through typical adolescent identity crises, and various forms of anthropomorphic life whose very presence challenged conventional assumptions about classroom management techniques. His daily schedule required constant improvisation, creative problem-solving, and the kind of diplomatic skills typically associated with international peace negotiations. The relationship between Principal Brown and his most senior faculty member represented one of the defining dynamics of the institution's operational philosophy. Miss Lucy Simeon had been teaching at Elmore Junior High since before the current definitions of teaching, learning, and educational methodology had been established by professional organizations. Her tenure at the school stretched back through geological epochs, her experience encompassing educational theories that had been popular before the invention of conventional pedagogy, and her classroom management techniques refined through centuries of practical application, with students whose very existence challenged every assumption about what learning could accomplish. Miss Simeon's approach to education was characterized by a combination of absolute authority, creative discipline, and barely suppressed frustration with the declining standards of each successive generation of students who seemed increasingly incapable of meeting the expectations that had been routine for their predecessors. Her particular antagonism toward the Watterson family, especially young Gumball, reflected deeper concerns about the direction that modern education was taking, and her own growing sense that the traditional values that had once guided her profession were being eroded by progressive theories that prioritized student comfort over academic achievement. Yet beneath her stern exterior and apparent cruelty lay a profound dedication to her profession that had survived decades of disappointment and disillusionment. Miss Simeon's harsh treatment of her students reflected not sadistic pleasure in their suffering, but a desperate attempt to prepare them for a world that would show them no mercy if they failed to develop the strength, discipline, and resilience necessary for survival in environments far more challenging than any classroom could provide. The teaching staff that surrounded these administrative pillars represented a cross-section of educational expertise drawn from across the spectrum of animated existence. Each faculty member brought their own unique background, specialized knowledge, and particular approach to the challenges of nurturing young minds whose diversity exceeded anything that conventional teacher training programs had prepared them to address. The physical education department was overseen by Coach Russo, whose understanding of athletic development had been shaped by experiences with students whose physical capabilities ranged from the supernatural to the physically impossible. Her programs had evolved to accommodate the needs of young people who might possess super strength, the ability to fly, shape-shifting capabilities, or various forms of elemental control, while simultaneously ensuring that students with more conventional physical attributes were not left behind or made to feel inadequate by comparison with their more extraordinarily gifted classmates. The mathematics department struggled daily with the challenge of teaching numerical concepts to students who existed in a universe where cartoon logic could override mathematical principles whenever narrative necessity demanded such. Interventions. Traditional arithmetic became complicated when some students could multiply by dividing, subtract to achieve addition, or solve complex equations through interpretive dance rather than conventional computational methods. The science faculty faced perhaps the greatest challenges of all, attempting to teach natural laws to students whose very existence violated most of the principles that formed the foundation of scientific understanding. Biology classes included students who had evolved beyond their original species through sheer force of will. Chemistry laboratories regularly produced results that defied the periodic table, and physics lessons were constantly interrupted by practical demonstrations of how cartoon logic could supersede conventional understanding of motion, energy, and matter. The literature department found their traditional curriculum inadequate for students whose lived experiences included interactions with sentient objects, conversations with abstract concepts, and adventures that regularly transcended the boundaries between reality and imagination. Classic works of fiction seemed mundane compared to the daily experiences of young people who navigated worlds where metaphors could become literal, and where the impossible was so routine that it barely merited comment. Yet despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Elmore Junior High had developed a reputation for producing graduates who were exceptionally well prepared for life, in a universe where adaptability, creativity, and the ability to maintain one's sanity in the face of constant impossibility were more valuable than conventional academic knowledge. The school's alumni went on to successful careers in fields that ranged from traditional professions to occupations that had not existed before graduates invented them through their unique combinations of skills and perspectives. Into this extraordinary educational environment came the Watterson children, each bringing their own distinctive gifts and challenges to an institution that had learned through hard experience that no two students could be approached with identical methods and expectations. Their arrival was anticipated by faculty who had heard rumors about the family's legendary status within the community and who understood that these particular students would likely push the boundaries of what their educational programs could accommodate. Gumball entered the halls of Elmore Junior High like a force of nature disguised as a 12-year-old boy, his enthusiasm for learning matched only by his remarkable ability to discover hidden complexities in the most straightforward academic exercises. His approach to classroom participation was characterized by questions that revealed fundamental inconsistencies in how subjects were supposed to be taught, observations that challenged basic assumptions about the material being presented, and a creativity that transformed routine assignments into opportunities for exploring possibilities that curriculum designers had never anticipated. His relationship with formal education was complicated by his tendency to find the most interesting aspects of any lesson in directions that diverged significantly from the intended learning objectives. Mathematics classes became explorations of philosophical concepts about the nature of quantity and measurement. Literature discussions evolved into examinations of how fictional narratives related to the students' own experiences with impossibility and adventure. Science laboratories turned into practical workshops where theoretical principles were tested through experiments that occasionally required intervention from local emergency services. Darwin's integration into the educational system presented unique challenges that had never been addressed by conventional special education policies. His transformation from pet goldfish to family member had been so complete that he possessed all the intellectual capabilities of his classmates while retaining certain physical characteristics that required accommodations that school administrators had never needed to consider. His enthusiasm for learning was infectious. his loyalty to his friends and family absolute, and his perspective on academic subjects colored by experiences that no other student in the institution's history had ever brought to classroom discussions. The bond between Gumball and Darwin transcended typical friendships to become a partnership that enhanced both of their educational experiences, while occasionally creating complications for teachers who were unprepared for students who functioned as a unified team in addressing academic challenges. Their collaboration on assignments produced results that demonstrated creativity and insight that exceeded what either could have accomplished individually, though their methods often involved approaches that pushed the boundaries of what conventional academic policies considered acceptable. Anais, despite her chronologically younger age, entered the institution with intellectual capabilities that surpassed most of her older classmates and occasionally challenged the knowledge base of her instructors. Her presence in age-appropriate classes created situations where traditional grade-level expectations proved inadequate for someone whose understanding of complex concepts had developed according to internal schedules rather than conventional educational timelines. Her approach to learning was characterized by efficiency and precision that contrasted sharply with her brother's more chaotic methods, though her results were no less extraordinary for their systematic nature. She absorbed information at rates that amazed even experienced educators, synthesized concepts across disciplines in ways that revealed connections that others had missed, and demonstrated problem-solving abilities that suggested her education was proceeding according to principles that transcended conventional pedagogical categories. The student body that surrounded the Watterson children represented a microcosm of the community's extraordinary diversity, each individual bringing their own unique background, abilities, and challenges to the collective project of adolescent development and social integration. These young people had learned to navigate the complex dynamics of integrated education where differences in species, supernatural abilities, and fundamental approaches to existence were treated as sources of strength rather than barriers to understanding. Penny Fitzgerald moved through the halls of Elmore Junior High encased in a shell that represented more than mere physical protection. It was the visible manifestation of family expectations, social pressures, and personal fears that had crystallized around her developing identity like armor that had become too heavy to bear. Her father's influence permeated every aspect of her existence, from the activities she was permitted to pursue to the friendships she was allowed to develop, creating a carefully controlled environment that was supposed to prepare her for success, but that often felt more like a beautiful prison. Her relationship with Gumball represented everything that her structured upbringing had not prepared her to handle: spontaneity, creative chaos, and the kind of emotional authenticity that threatened to crack the protective barriers that had been built around her developing personality. Yet, something in his unguarded enthusiasm for life, his absolute sincerity in expressing his feelings, and his complete acceptance of her exactly as she was, began to work changes in her that would eventually prove more transformative than any of the careful character development that her family's expectations had attempted to cultivate. The shell that enclosed her was not merely physical but psychological, representing layers of protection that had been constructed to shield her from a world that her family considered dangerous and unpredictable. Yet these same protective measures that were supposed to preserve her safety also prevented her from experiencing the full range of emotional connections and personal growth opportunities that her classmates took for granted. Carrie Kruger drifted through the hallways with the ethereal presence of someone who existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions of reality, her ghostly nature, allowing her to observe social dynamics from perspectives that her more corporeal classmates could never achieve. Her undead status brought unique challenges to typical adolescent experiences. Romantic relationships became complicated, when physical contact required supernatural intervention, while academic assignments often needed to be adapted for someone whose existence transcended conventional boundaries between life and death. Yet her supernatural nature also provided her with insights into the deeper truths that governed their extraordinary community. Understanding about the connections between different forms of consciousness that helped bridge gaps between students whose backgrounds and abilities might otherwise have prevented meaningful communication. Her friendship with other students often served as a stabilizing influence during conflicts that arose from misunderstandings about the different ways that various forms of animated existence expressed emotion and formed social bonds. Her relationship with her family represented its own set of challenges. As her parents' expectations for her afterlife, development often conflicted with her desire to experience typical teenage activities and form connections with classmates whose very aliveness created barriers that supernatural intervention could address but never completely eliminate. Tobias Wilson approached his educational experience with the desperate intensity of someone whose entire sense of self-worth depended upon achieving a level of social acceptance that always seemed to remain just beyond his reach. His pursuit of coolness was not mere vanity, but a survival strategy in a social environment where status hierarchies could shift without warning, and where failure to maintain one's position could result in social exile that felt more devastating than physical harm. His various schemes to achieve popularity often involved elaborate plans that demonstrated more creativity and organizational ability than his academic performance might suggest, though these same efforts frequently backfired in ways that increased rather than decreased the social distance between himself and the classmates whose acceptance he craved. His relationship with his mother added another layer of complexity to his social navigation, as her influence over his choices often conflicted with his understanding of what behaviors would enhance his reputation among his peers. Yet beneath his surface, desperation for acceptance lay genuine qualities of loyalty and creativity that emerged most clearly during moments when his guard was down and his calculated pursuit of coolness gave way to authentic, emotional responses to the situations and relationships that defined his daily experience. Banana Joe brought to every interaction an enthusiasm and optimism that seemed immune to the disappointments and setbacks that might have discouraged less resilient personalities. His approach to friendship was characterized by unconditional acceptance and infectious joy that could transform routine activities into celebrations and ordinary conversations into opportunities for shared laughter and mutual support. His natural comedic gifts extended beyond simple entertainment to serve as a social lubricant that could diffuse tensions, bridge differences between conflicting personalities, and create environments where other students felt safe to express their authentic selves without fear of judgment or rejection. His presence in group dynamics often shifted the entire emotional atmosphere in directions that enabled more productive collaboration and deeper understanding between individuals who might otherwise have struggled to find common ground. Yet his relentlessly positive approach to life sometimes masked deeper complexities in his emotional landscape, moments when his cheerful exterior served as protection against anxieties and insecurities that he preferred not to acknowledge or explore in public settings. Alan Keane moved through his educational experience with the kind of effortless perfection that made him simultaneously admired and resented by classmates who struggled with the ordinary challenges of adolescent development. His natural abilities seemed to encompass every area of academic and social achievement, from athletic performance to artistic expression to leadership capabilities that emerged without apparent effort or conscious cultivation. His perfection was not mere talent, but seemed to reflect some deeper harmony with the fundamental principles that govern success in their extraordinary community. He understood instinctively how to navigate social situations that left others confused, how to excel in academic subjects that challenged his classmates, and how to maintain personal relationships that remained stable and supportive even when surrounding circumstances became chaotic or unpredictable. Yet this same perfection that made him an ideal student and friend also created a subtle form of isolation, as his classmates sometimes felt inadequate by comparison or suspected that his achievements came too easily to reflect genuine effort or understanding of the struggles that others faced in pursuing similar goals. Leslie represented a unique perspective on identity and self-expression that challenged conventional assumptions about gender, personality, and the relationship between individual consciousness and physical form. His botanical nature required accommodations that school policies had never needed to address, while his approach to social interactions reflected sensitivities and perspectives that enriched classroom discussions and friendship dynamics in ways that his classmates gradually learned to appreciate and value. His presence in group activities often introduced elements of natural wisdom and environmental awareness that connected academic subjects to broader ecological principles, while his personal style and self-presentation demonstrated possibilities for authentic self-expression that inspired other students to explore their own identities with greater creativity and courage. The relationships that formed between these diverse individuals represented experiments in cross-species communication, an understanding that had implications extending far beyond typical adolescent friendship networks. Their bonds were tested by differences that went to the very core of how various forms of consciousness experienced existence, yet strengthened by shared experiences of navigating an educational system that demanded constant adaptation to circumstances that conventional social preparation had never addressed. The romantic relationships that developed within this extraordinary student body required negotiation of boundaries and expectations that typical teenage romance guides had never contemplated. Gumball's growing affection for Penny represented more than simple attraction. It was a connection that challenged both of them to grow beyond the limitations that their backgrounds and circumstances had imposed on their understanding of what relationships could accomplish. Their interactions were complicated by the shell that protected Penny from full emotional engagement, by Gumball's tendency to express his feelings through elaborate gestures that sometimes backfired spectacularly, and by social pressures that made their connection more difficult to maintain than either had anticipated. Yet something in their mutual recognition of each other's authentic selves created a foundation for emotional growth that would prove stronger than the obstacles that seemed to conspire against their happiness. Darwin's own romantic adventures reflected his unique perspective as someone who had learned about human emotions and social relationships through observation rather than instinct, leading to misunderstandings and misadventures that were both touching and amusing in their demonstration of how love could transcend the boundaries between different forms of consciousness, while still requiring practical navigation of social customs and expectations. The friendships that bound the student body together created networks of mutual support that could withstand the pressures of academic competition, social hierarchy, and the various crises that regularly disrupted their educational experience. These relationships represented more than temporary alliances of convenience. They were genuine connections between individuals who had learned to appreciate each other's unique gifts, while providing emotional safety nets that enabled everyone to take the risks necessary for authentic, personal growth and development. The daily rhythm of life at Elmore Junior High had evolved to accommodate the constant possibility of extraordinary events that could transform routine educational activities into adventures that tested every skill the students and faculty had developed through years of experience with the impossible and improbable. Class periods might be interrupted by reality-altering experiments gone wrong, by visits from interdimensional travelers, or by the spontaneous manifestation of supernatural phenomena that required immediate attention from individuals trained in crisis management techniques that conventional emergency response training had never addressed. Yet through all the chaos and impossibility, through all the challenges that arose from attempting to provide quality education to a population whose very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about how learning was supposed to occur, Elmore Junior High continued to fulfill its primary mission of preparing young minds for successful navigation of adult responsibilities in a universe where adaptability, creativity, and the courage to embrace the unknown were more valuable than any specific knowledge or skill that traditional curricula could provide. The institution had become more than a school. It was a laboratory for exploring the possibilities of what education could accomplish when freed from conventional limitations and empowered to address the real needs of students whose futures would require capabilities that previous generations had never needed to develop. In its halls, young people learned not just academic subjects, but how to maintain their humanity and compassion while navigating circumstances that would have challenged the greatest heroes of legend and story. In the peaceful rhythms of suburban life that had come to characterize the Watterson family's existence in their extraordinary corner of reality, there existed moments of deceptive tranquility when it seemed as though chaos had been tamed, impossibility contained, and the fundamental laws governing their universe temporarily stabilized into something approaching conventional predictability. These interludes of apparent normalcy served not as evidence that their lives had settled into routine patterns, but rather as the calm that precedes storms of such magnificent proportions that they would reshape not only the family's understanding of what was possible, but the very fabric of reality itself within the boundaries of their animated world. The first harbinger of the adventures that would define the Watterson children's legendary status within their community came in the form of a seemingly innocuous remote control device that Gumball discovered during one of his routine explorations of the basement's accumulated mysteries. This was not the universal remote that had played such a crucial role in the cosmic foundations of their reality, but rather a more modest device, whose origins lay in the intersection of ancient Sheikah technology and modern consumer electronics, a hybrid creation that had been abandoned in their storage area by circumstances that none of the family members could quite recall. The remote appeared ordinary enough, a sleek black rectangle, adorned with the usual array of buttons and digital displays that characterize such devices throughout the civilized world. Yet something in its weight, in the way light seemed to bend slightly around its edges, and in the subtle harmonics that emanated from its internal circuitry, suggested that this particular remote had capabilities that extended far beyond the simple control of televisions and audio equipment that its external appearance might suggest to casual observation. Gumball's discovery of the device occurred during one of those lazy afternoon periods when school had ended but evening activities had not yet begun, a temporal pocket where young minds naturally gravitated toward exploration and experimentation that would later be remembered either as harmless childhood adventures or as the opening movements of catastrophes that required adult intervention to prevent permanent alteration of local reality. Structures. His initial experiments with the remote's functions proceeded according to the logical progression that any curious 12-year-old might follow when encountering unfamiliar technology. He began by attempting to use it for its apparent intended purpose, aiming it at their television set and pressing buttons in various combinations to determine which functions corresponded to which effects. The results of these preliminary tests seemed to confirm his assumption that this was indeed a conventional remote control device, albeit one whose manufacturing origins remained mysteriously unclear. It was only when Gumball inadvertently pointed the remote toward Darwin while pressing what he assumed to be a volume control button that the device's true nature began to reveal itself in ways that would fundamentally alter both brothers' understanding of the malleable nature of reality within their household. Instead of affecting the television's audio output, the button press caused Darwin to begin speaking at double his normal speed, his words tumbling over each other in a rapid-fire cascade of compressed syllables that made normal conversation impossible, while providing both brothers with their first indication that they had stumbled upon something far more significant than conventional consumer electronics. The discovery that the remote could affect living beings rather than just electronic devices opened up possibilities that captured Gumball's imagination with the kind of irresistible fascination that had historically preceded many of the family's most memorable adventures. Here was a tool that could potentially solve any problem, enhance any experience, and transform mundane activities into opportunities for exploration that conventional toys and games could never provide. His subsequent experiments with the device's capabilities revealed functions that seemed to operate according to principles that blended advanced technology with what could only be described as concentrated wish fulfillment. Buttons that could slow down or accelerate the passage of time within localized areas. Controls that could alter the emotional states of individuals within the device's range of influence. Settings that could modify physical properties such as size, weight, and even fundamental characteristics like species identity, though these more dramatic transformations proved temporary and gradually reverted to baseline states when the device's influence was removed. The temptation to use such power for personal advantage proved irresistible to a young mind that had not yet developed the wisdom necessary to anticipate the long-term consequences of actions that seemed harmless in their immediate application. Gumball's initial uses of the remote focused on solving minor inconveniences and enhancing pleasurable experiences, speeding through boring conversations, slowing down enjoyable activities to make them last longer, adjusting his family members' emotional states to make them more amenable to requests that might otherwise be denied. Yet each application of the device's power created subtle ripple effects that gradually accumulated into larger distortions in the normal flow of cause and effect that governed their household's daily operations. Time dilation effects began to create temporal inconsistencies where different family members experienced the passage of minutes and hours according to different rates, leading to confusion about schedules, missed appointments, and a growing sense that something fundamental about their shared reality was becoming increasingly unstable. The emotional manipulations, while initially producing desired outcomes in terms of improved cooperation and reduced conflict, gradually created an artificial atmosphere where genuine feelings became indistinguishable from technologically induced states, undermining the authentic relationships that formed the foundation of the family's emotional security and mutual support systems. Darwin's growing awareness of these manipulations created the first serious rift in his relationship with Gumball, as the goldfish brother struggled to reconcile his loyalty to his adoptive sibling with his growing understanding that his own emotional responses and decision-making processes were being altered without his knowledge or consent. The discovery that their recent harmonious interactions had been artificially enhanced rather than reflecting genuine improvements in their communication and understanding created a crisis of trust that threatened to permanently damage the praking bond that had always been the strongest relationship within the household. The situation reached its critical point when Gumball's increasingly ambitious applications of the remote's power began to affect not just individual family members, but the fundamental structure of their reality itself. His attempt to create a perfect day by manipulating every variable within his environment, accelerating boring activities, enhancing pleasant experiences, adjusting other people's responses to ensure optimal outcomes, created a cascade of temporal paradoxes and causal inversions that threatened to tear apart the fabric of space and time within their immediate vicinity. The resolution of this crisis required Nicole's intervention with her characteristic combination of supernatural competence and maternal fury, as she recognized that her son's well-intentioned experiments were approaching levels of reality alteration that could have permanent consequences extending far beyond their immediate household. Her confiscation of the device and the subsequent family discussion about the ethical implications of using power to manipulate others' experiences without their consent became one of those pivotal moments that marked Gumball's gradual maturation from impulsive child to young person, capable of understanding the broader implications of his actions. Yet even as one reality-altering crisis was resolved through family intervention and hard-won wisdom about the responsible use of extraordinary power, the universe was preparing to test the Watterson family's adaptability through challenges that would emerge from the intersection of modern technology and their particular gift for discovering hidden complexities in apparently straightforward situations. The video game invasion began as what appeared to be a routine software malfunction, the kind of minor technical difficulty that any family with adolescent children might expect to encounter when dealing with entertainment systems that had been subjected to enthusiastic use by young people whose approach to gaming. Technology often pushed devices beyond their intended operational parameters. Gumball and Darwin had been engaged in what they assumed was a conventional gaming session, competing in a digital adventure that required them to navigate virtual environments while overcoming obstacles and defeating opponents according to the established rules and objectives that define the game's challenge structure. The transition from normal gaming experience to reality-altering catastrophe occurred so gradually that neither brother initially recognized the fundamental nature of what was happening to their immediate environment. The first signs of dimensional intrusion manifested as subtle improvements in the game's graphics and responsiveness that seemed to indicate superior programming rather than supernatural phenomenon. The digital characters appeared more lifelike than usual, their movements more fluid and realistic, their responses to player input more sophisticated and seemingly intelligent. It was only when elements from the game world began to manifest in their physical environment that the true scope of the situation became apparent. Digital opponents that had been defeated in virtual combat began appearing in their living room, their pixelated forms somehow achieving three-dimensional solidity while retaining the visual characteristics that marked them as originating from electronic rather than biological reality. Virtual weapons and power-ups materialized on their coffee table, their game world properties intact, despite their transition from digital code to physical objects. The family's response to this invasion of their domestic space by video game elements reflected their characteristic approaches to crisis management and problem-solving. Richard's initial reaction was delighted fascination with the magical transformation of their entertainment system into something that provided direct access to adventure without requiring him to leave the comfort of his favorite chair. Nicole's response was immediate recognition of the potential dangers posed by the presence of combat-oriented digital entities in an environment containing her children, leading to the deployment of her supernatural, protective capabilities against opponents whose programming had not prepared them for encounters with maternal fury made manifest in physical form. Aeneas approached the situation with scientific curiosity, recognizing that they were witnessing an unprecedented convergence of digital and physical reality that represented opportunities for understanding fundamental principles governing the relationship between consciousness, information, and material existence. Her analysis of the phenomenon revealed that the game world was not simply invading their reality, but was gradually merging with it, creating a hybrid environment where the rules governing both digital and physical existence were becoming increasingly blended and interchangeable. The resolution of this crisis required collaborative effort from all family members, each contributing their unique talents to the challenge of separating the merged realities without causing permanent damage to either their household or the integrity of the game world that had become entangled with their daily existence. Gumball's understanding of gaming mechanics proved essential for navigating the hybrid environment according to rules that combined physical laws with digital logic, while Darwin's loyalty and courage enabled him to serve as player 2 in adventures that required coordination between brothers whose bond transcended the boundaries between real and virtual existence. The experience left the family with a deeper appreciation for the potential consequences of their interactions with technology, while simultaneously demonstrating their capacity for adapting to circumstances that challenged every assumption about the boundaries between different forms of reality. Yet even as they celebrated their successful resolution of the video game crisis, the universe was preparing to test their adaptability through challenges that would emerge from the power of music and emotion to reshape the fundamental nature of their community's social dynamics. The great singing phenomenon began as what appeared to be a minor outbreak of musical enthusiasm among the student population of Elmore Junior High, the kind of spontaneous artistic expression that occasionally emerged in educational environments where creative young minds were encouraged to explore various forms of self-expression and cultural participation. Individual students began incorporating song and dance into their daily activities, transforming routine conversations into impromptu performances and ordinary hallway navigation into choreographed musical numbers that reflected their personal styles and emotional states. What initially appeared to be a harmless trend in student behavior gradually revealed itself to be something far more significant and potentially dangerous as the musical contagion spread beyond the school environment to encompass the broader community. Adults found themselves unable to resist joining in musical numbers that erupted spontaneously during business meetings, grocery shopping expeditions, and routine social interactions that had previously been conducted through conventional spoken communication. The phenomenon was not merely behavioral, but seemed to represent a fundamental alteration in how consciousness itself functioned within their community, as if some cosmic force had decided that reality would be improved by the addition of background music, synchronized choreography, and the kind of emotional expressiveness that typically characterized professional theatrical productions rather than everyday life. Gumball and Darwin found themselves at the epicenter of these musical events, their natural chemistry as brothers and best friends, translating seamlessly into performance dynamics that made them natural leaders of the elaborate song and dance numbers that continued to erupt with increasing frequency and complexity. Throughout their daily routine, their collaborations during these musical interludes demonstrated levels of creativity and emotional authenticity that impressed even family members who had grown accustomed to their extraordinary capabilities. Yet, as the phenomenon intensified and spread throughout the community, it became increasingly apparent that the constant musical expression was having unintended consequences on the practical aspects of daily life. Business transactions became impossible to complete when customers and merchants were compelled to express their negotiations through elaborate musical numbers. Emergency services found their response times severely compromised when crisis situations triggered community-wide song and dance productions that prevented access to accident scenes and medical emergencies. The resolution of the musical crisis required the community to work together in ways that transcended individual preferences and personal comfort zones, as citizens who had never considered themselves performers found themselves participating in a grand finale production that channeled their collective musical energy into a single coordinated expression that somehow satisfied the cosmic forces responsible for the phenomenon, while simultaneously restoring normal patterns of communication and social interaction. The experience left the Watterson family and their neighbors with a deeper appreciation for the power of artistic expression to bring communities together, while also demonstrating the importance of balance between creative fulfillment and practical necessity in maintaining functional social structures. As seasons cycled through their eternal dance of transformation and renewal, as the Watterson family's reputation for surviving impossible adventures continued to grow throughout their community, they found themselves facing challenges that tested not only their individual capabilities, but their collective capacity for maintaining hope and determination in situations where conventional wisdom suggested that failure was inevitable and catastrophe unavoidable. The day the sun refused to set emerged from the intersection of Gumball's well-intentioned attempts to extend a particularly perfect afternoon and cosmic forces that were apparently willing to accommodate his wishes in ways that he had not anticipated when making what he assumed was a purely metaphorical request for time to stand still. His emotional response to the approaching end of a day that had included successful academic performance, meaningful social interactions, and family activities that had generated genuine happiness and satisfaction, triggered alterations in the fundamental cosmic mechanisms that governed the relationship between celestial bodies and the passage of time within their local reality. The extended daylight that resulted from this intersection of personal desire and cosmic accommodation initially seemed like the fulfillment of childhood dreams about perfect days that could last forever, providing unlimited time for activities that generated joy while postponing indefinitely the responsibilities and obligations that marked the end of recreational periods. Yet as hours stretched into what should have been evening and night without any dimming of solar illumination or cooling of atmospheric temperature, the family began to recognize that they were experiencing something far more significant than temporarily adjusted schedules. The perpetual daylight began to have cascading effects on biological rhythms, social patterns, and ecological systems that had evolved to function according to predictable cycles of light and darkness. Plants began showing signs of stress from continuous photosynthesis without periods of rest and recovery. Nocturnal animals found themselves unable to engage in hunting and foraging behaviors that required darkness for optimal effectiveness. Human and anthropomorphic residents of the community experienced disrupted sleep patterns that affected their emotional stability, cognitive function, and physical health in ways that accumulated into community-wide crisis. The resolution of this temporal anomaly required Gumball to learn lessons about the importance of accepting natural rhythms and cycles, rather than attempting to extend positive experiences indefinitely, while demonstrating the family's capacity for taking responsibility for consequences that emerged from their interactions with forces beyond their complete understanding or control. The adventures in parallel timelines began when Anais' scientific curiosity about the nature of alternate reality led her to conduct experiments with theoretical physics concepts that she had discovered in advanced academic literature that was not typically accessible to students of her chronological age. Her investigations into the mathematical principles governing the relationship between possibility and actuality attracted the attention of cosmic forces that maintained the boundaries between different versions of reality, resulting in temporary access to alternate timelines where familiar events had unfolded according to different parameters and produced outcomes that ranged from subtle variations to dramatic alterations in the fundamental nature of their existence. The family's exploration of these alternate realities provided them with opportunities to observe how different choices and circumstances might have shaped their relationships and individual development, while simultaneously testing their appreciation for the specific combination of experiences and characteristics that define their particular version of family unity and mutual support. Some timelines revealed versions of themselves that had achieved greater conventional success through different approaches to education, career development, and social integration, while others showed the consequences of choices that had led to isolation, conflict, and the breakdown of the emotional bonds that formed the foundation of their strength and resilience. The experience of witnessing these alternatives reinforced their understanding of how precious and fragile their specific combination of personalities, experiences, and relationships actually was, while also demonstrating that love and family loyalty could transcend even the boundaries between different versions of reality when tested by circumstances that challenged the fundamental assumptions about what relationships could endure and overcome. Through all these reality-altering adventures and impossible challenges, through all the tests of their individual capabilities and collective resilience, the Watterson family continued to demonstrate that their greatest strength lay not in any specific supernatural abilities or technological advantages, but in their unwavering commitment to supporting each other through whatever circumstances the universe might devise, to test the limits of what love and family bonds could accomplish when faced with adventures that pushed the very boundaries of what animated existence could contain or survival require. Beneath the surface tranquility that characterized the daily rhythms of life in Elmore, beyond the cheerful chaos of school adventures and family misadventures that had come to define the Watterson experience, there existed mysteries of such profound depth and cosmic significance that their very presence challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the delicate boundaries that separated existence from non-existence in their animated universe. These were not the obvious impossibilities that manifested through cartoon logic, or the transparent supernatural elements that occasionally disrupted suburban routine, but rather hidden truths that operated according to principles so alien to normal understanding that their discovery required either extraordinary circumstances or the kind of accidental revelation that seemed to gravitate toward families whose very existence challenged conventional expectations. The first glimpse into these deeper mysteries came through Rob Needlemeyer's transformation from forgettable background student to cosmic entity of vengeance and reality manipulation, a metamorphosis so gradual and subtle that its early stages were invisible even to observers who had learned to recognize the signs of supernatural phenomena through years of experience with the impossible and improbable. Rob had always existed at the periphery of awareness, one of those individuals whose presence in group photographs and classroom attendance records provided evidence of their participation in community life, while somehow failing to register in the conscious memory of classmates, teachers, and even family members who interacted with them on a regular basis. This peculiar form of social invisibility was not the result of any intentional effort on Rob's part to avoid attention or remain unnoticed, nor was it a supernatural ability that he had cultivated for personal advantage or protection. Rather, it represented a fundamental characteristic of his existence within the narrative structure that governed their reality, a cosmic designation that marked him as expendable, forgettable, and ultimately dispensable when the universe needed to make room for more important characters and storylines that demanded greater allocation of narrative resources and audience attention. The mechanisms through which certain individuals became designated as forgettable operated according to principles that existed at the intersection of cosmic bureaucracy and narrative necessity, systems that evaluated the relative importance of various characters based on their contributions to ongoing storylines, their potential for generating interesting complications, and their capacity for forming meaningful relationships with more central figures in the community's social hierarchy. Those who failed to meet minimum thresholds for narrative significance found themselves gradually fading from active participation in reality, their presence becoming increasingly tenuous until they eventually crossed the threshold into complete non-existence. Rob's journey toward this cosmic exile began during his years at Elmore Junior High, when subtle changes in his social interactions and academic performance indicated that he was beginning to lose his tenuous grip on meaningful participation in the shared reality that defined their community. His contributions to classroom discussions were increasingly ignored or forgotten immediately after he spoke. His presence in group activities became so peripheral that photographs often failed to capture his image despite clear evidence that he had been present during the events being documented. The process was so gradual and its effects so subtle that Rob himself was initially unaware of what was happening to his fundamental existence within their reality. He attributed the increasing difficulty he experienced in gaining others' attention to normal social dynamics, assuming that his problems with recognition and memory retention reflected personal shortcomings rather than cosmic forces that were systematically erasing his significance from the narrative structure that governed their universe. The final stage of his transition from marginal existence to complete non-existence occurred during one of those routine school days when nothing particularly extraordinary seemed to be happening, when the normal rhythms of educational activity proceeded without obvious disruption or supernatural intervention. Rob simply stopped being present in the conventional sense, his physical form becoming increasingly translucent until he achieved complete invisibility, his voice fading from audible range until his words could no longer reach the consciousness of those around him. Yet rather than simply ceasing to exist, as the cosmic mechanisms responsible for his exile had apparently intended, Rob found himself transported to a realm that existed beyond the boundaries of normal reality, a space that had been designated as a repository for narrative elements that had been deemed unnecessary for the continuation of ongoing storylines, but that possessed sufficient coherence to maintain some form of existence outside the primary universe. The void was not a place in any conventional sense, for it existed independently of the spatial and temporal coordinates that defined normal geography and chronology. Rather, it functioned as a state of being that accommodated those who had been rejected by reality while preserving their essential characteristics and memories in forms that could potentially be reintegrated into active existence if circumstances ever demanded their return to narrative significance. Within this liminal realm, Rob encountered other entities who had undergone similar transitions from existence to non-existence, individuals whose stories had been deemed complete or whose presence had become incompatible with the evolving needs of their universe's narrative structure. These fellow exiles represented a cross-section of forgotten possibilities, abandoned storylines, and characters whose development had been interrupted by editorial decisions that prioritized other narrative elements over their continued participation in active reality. The Doctor represented perhaps the most mysterious of these void dwellers, a figure whose original identity and purpose remained shrouded in ambiguity, even to those who shared his exile from conventional existence. His knowledge of the cosmic mechanisms that govern their universe far exceeded that of his fellow outcasts, suggesting that his banishment from reality had been the result of understanding too much about the fundamental nature of their existence, rather than simple narrative irrelevance. The Doctor's presence within the void served multiple purposes, as he functioned simultaneously as informal leader of the exile community, repository of knowledge about the forces that had shaped their circumstances, and potential guide for those who sought to understand the broader implications of their situation. His insights into the relationship between consciousness and reality, between narrative necessity and individual existence, provided frameworks for comprehending experiences that challenged every assumption about what it meant to be real in an animated universe. Other void inhabitants included characters who had been abandoned during early stages of story development, individuals whose narrative potential had been explored and found insufficient for continued investment of creative resources, and entities who had been created for specific purposes that had been fulfilled or rendered obsolete by changes in the universe's ongoing requirements for conflict, comedy, and character development. The social dynamics within the void operated according to principles that differed significantly from those that govern normal reality, as the usual hierarchies based on popularity, success, and narrative importance became meaningless in an environment where everyone shared the common experience of having been deemed unworthy of continued existence. Instead, relationships formed around shared understanding of rejection, mutual support in maintaining sanity and identity despite cosmic abandonment, and collaborative efforts to preserve memories and experiences that might otherwise be lost forever. Rob's adaptation to life in the void was characterized by a growing understanding of the injustices that had led to his exile and a corresponding desire for revenge against the reality that had discarded him without consideration for his own preferences or feelings about his cosmic significance. His transformation from confused victim of circumstance to determined agent of retribution reflected both his personal response to the trauma of non-existence and his growing mastery of the unique abilities that residents in the void had granted him. The powers that Rob developed during his exile were not conventional supernatural abilities, but rather represented mastery over the fundamental inconsistencies and logical gaps that existed within their animated universe. He learned to exploit the contradictions between different episodes, to navigate the spaces between cause and effect that cartoon logic had created, and to manipulate the narrative structures that determined which events were considered canonical and which could be dismissed as temporary aberrations. His eventual return to active reality was motivated not by cosmic forgiveness or narrative necessity, but by his own determination to force recognition of his existence through actions that could not be ignored or forgotten. His transformation from Rob the forgettable student to Rob the nemesis represented one of the most dramatic character developments in their community's history, demonstrating that even those who had been rejected by reality possessed the potential for achieving significance through sheer force of will and creative application of cosmic understanding. The implications of Rob's journey from existence to non-existence and back to active participation in reality extended far beyond his personal story to raise fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and worth within their animated universe. His experience revealed that the boundaries between real and unreal were far more porous and arbitrary than most residents of Elmore had ever imagined, while simultaneously demonstrating that individual determination could overcome even cosmic rejection when channeled through sufficient understanding and creative application. Meanwhile, in the apparently mundane setting of the Awesome Store, Mysteries of equal cosmic significance were unfolding through the daily activities of an establishment that served simultaneously as retail outlet, interdimensional nexus, and repository for artifacts whose true nature challenged every assumption about the relationship between commerce and cosmic responsibility. The store's proprietor, Larry Needlemeyer, existed as perhaps the most overworked individual in their entire universe, his employment responsibilities extending across every conceivable occupation and professional role that their community required for continued function and social stability. Larry's omnipresence throughout Elmore was not the result of economic necessity or ambitious career planning, but rather represented a fundamental aspect of how reality maintained its stability in an environment where the normal rules governing employment, professional specialization, and economic distribution of labor had been superseded by cartoon logic and narrative convenience. He functioned simultaneously as cashier, cook, delivery driver, emergency responder, bureaucratic functionary, and dozens of other occupations that required immediate availability whenever plot developments or character needs demanded services that no one else was available to provide. The philosophical implications of Larry's universal employment extended beyond simple workplace logistics to encompass questions about individual identity, professional fulfillment, and the relationship between personal desires and cosmic obligations in a universe where some individuals were designated to serve supporting roles that enabled others to pursue adventures and personal growth. His acceptance of this extraordinary burden suggested either supernatural patience and dedication to community service, or resignation to cosmic forces that had determined his role without consulting his own preferences about how his existence should unfold. The Awesome Store itself functioned as more than a conventional retail establishment, serving as a nexus point where objects of extraordinary power and potential danger could be safely contained within the familiar context of consumer capitalism. The store's inventory included artifacts whose origins spanned across multiple dimensions and historical epochs, technological devices that operated according to principles that conventional science had never addressed, and mystical objects whose powers could reshape reality in ways that their casual appearance and reasonable pricing did nothing to suggest. The mechanisms through which such extraordinary items found their way onto the store's shelves remained mysterious even to Larry himself, who had learned through experience to accept deliveries without questioning their origins or investigating the circumstances that had made them available for retail purchase. The cosmic forces responsible for maintaining balance between accessibility and safety had apparently determined that the most dangerous objects in their universe could be effectively neutralized by subjecting them to the bureaucratic processes and economic constraints that govern normal commercial transactions. Customers who purchased reality-altering artifacts from the Awesome Store rarely understood the true nature of what they were acquiring, interpreting obviously supernatural phenomena as clever special effects or innovative design features that demonstrated superior manufacturing techniques rather than cosmic significance. This collective willful blindness served as an additional safety mechanism that prevented casual users from fully exploiting the devastating potential of devices that could theoretically reshape the fundamental structure of their universe. If wielded by individuals who understood their true capabilities, the store's role in containing potentially universe-threatening artifacts extended beyond simple retail sales to encompass more complex responsibilities related to monitoring, maintenance, and occasional retrieval of items whose effects had proven too disruptive for continued civilian access. Larry's duties included tracking the long-term consequences of various purchases, intervening when necessary to prevent catastrophic misuse of powerful devices, and maintaining diplomatic relationships with interdimensional suppliers whose continued cooperation was essential for preventing even more dangerous artifacts from entering uncontrolled circulation. The government agencies responsible for oversight of supernatural phenomena within their community maintained complex relationships with both Larry and the Awesome Store, recognizing that his universal employment and access to reality-altering merchandise made him simultaneously an invaluable resource for crisis management and a potential security threat whose activities required ongoing monitoring, occasional intervention. These relationships were characterized by mutual dependence tempered by institutional suspicion, as government officials recognized their need for Larry's services, while remaining concerned about the concentration of cosmic power and responsibility in the hands of a single individual whose ultimate loyalties remained unclear. The Rainbow Factory, where Nicole had spent her formative years developing the supernatural abilities that had made her legendary among parents facing impossible child-rearing challenges, represented another layer of hidden complexity within their community's industrial and economic infrastructure. The facility's ostensible purpose of processing emotions into visible spectrum phenomena provided cover for research and development activities that extended into areas of consciousness, manipulation, reality alteration, and dimensional engineering that government oversight agencies preferred to monitor from a respectful distance rather than attempting direct regulation or control. The factory's operations required workers whose emotional capacity and psychological resilience exceeded normal human ranges, individuals capable of channeling intense feelings through industrial processes that would have driven ordinary employees to nervous breakdowns or psychological collapse within their first week of employment. The screening and training programs that identified and prepared suitable candidates represented some of the most advanced psychological profiling and conditioning techniques ever developed, creating a workforce whose capabilities transcended normal human limitations, while maintaining sufficient stability to function within structured work environments. The products generated by these processes possessed qualities that extended far beyond simple visual beauty, carrying within their spectral compositions emotional resonances that could influence the psychological states of observers across vast distances and temporal spans. Rainbows produced by the factory served not merely as atmospheric decoration, but as tools for maintaining community morale, suppressing social unrest, and providing subtle psychological guidance that helped residents navigate the complex emotional challenges that characterized life in an environment where the impossible had become routine. The research divisions within the Rainbow Factory explored applications of emotional processing technology that extended into areas of weather control, agricultural enhancement, and therapeutic intervention for individuals whose psychological development had been disrupted by exposure to too much cartoon logic or supernatural phenomena. These advanced applications required oversight from government agencies whose own existence remained hidden from the general public, creating layers of bureaucratic complexity that ensured accountability while maintaining the secrecy necessary for continued operations. The connections between these various hidden elements of their community's infrastructure revealed patterns of interdependence and mutual support that extended throughout every aspect of daily life in Elmore, from the educational system that prepared young minds for navigation of impossible circumstances, to the commercial establishments that provided access to reality-altering technology, to the government agencies that maintained stability and security, while preserving the illusion of normal suburban existence for residents who preferred not to confront the cosmic implications of their animated reality. Understanding these deeper mysteries required recognition that their universe operated according to principles that transcended conventional categories of science, economics, politics, and social organization, creating systems of extraordinary complexity and sophistication that functioned smoothly, precisely because most residents remained unaware of their existence and continued to approach daily life with the comfortable assumption that normal rules applied to circumstances that were actually governed by forces of cosmic significance and supernatural capability. In the gentle twilight hours that descended upon the Watterson household, like a benediction of peace after days filled with the beautiful chaos that had become their family's signature contribution to the ongoing adventure of existence, there emerged moments of profound connection and understanding that revealed the deeper truths about love, growth, and the bonds that unite hearts across the boundaries of species, age, and the infinite complications that arise when extraordinary individuals attempt to build lives together in a universe where the impossible has become commonplace and wonder never truly ends. The romantic entanglements that had begun to weave themselves through the daily fabric of the Watterson children's educational and social experiences represented far more than typical adolescent attractions or the predictable, emotional developments that mark the transition from childhood innocence to the more complex understanding of relationships that characterizes mature consciousness. These connections were forged in the crucible of shared adventures, tested by circumstances that pushed every assumption about compatibility and communication beyond conventional limits, and strengthened by experiences that revealed character depths that normal social interaction might never have had occasion to explore or celebrate. Gumball's relationship with Penny Fitzgerald had evolved from initial attraction based on superficial characteristics, her obvious beauty, her academic excellence, her social status within their school's complex hierarchy of adolescent recognition and approval, into something approaching genuine understanding of the person who existed beneath the protective shell that her family's expectations and her own fears had constructed around her developing identity. The shell itself had become both barrier and symbol in their relationship, representing all the obstacles that separated them, while simultaneously serving as a tangible reminder of the growth and courage that would be required from both of them if their connection was ever to achieve its full potential. Their interactions were characterized by a delicate dance of approach and retreat, moments of authentic communication, alternating with periods of misunderstanding and frustration that reflected not incompatibility, but rather the inherent challenges that arise when two individuals who have been shaped by very different experiences and expectations attempt to create shared understanding across the gaps that separate their respective worldviews and emotional vocabularies. Penny's life within the Fitzgerald household was governed by structures and expectations that had been designed to prepare her for success according to very specific definitions that emphasized academic achievement, social propriété, and the kind of controlled perfection that could survive scrutiny from community leaders, educational administrators, and the various authority figures whose approval was considered essential for maintaining family reputation and social standing. These protective measures, while well-intentioned, had created an environment where spontaneity was discouraged. Emotional authenticity was subordinated to appropriate behavior, and the kind of creative chaos that characterized the Watterson approach to life was viewed as dangerous rather than enriching. Her father's influence permeated every aspect of her daily experience, from the activities she was permitted to pursue to the friendships she was allowed to develop, creating a carefully regulated existence that was supposed to shield her from the unpredictable elements of their community, while ensuring that her development proceeded according to plans that had been formulated by adults whose primary concern was her safety and future success rather than her immediate happiness or personal fulfillment. The contrast between Penny's regulated existence and Gumball's chaotic freedom created both attraction and anxiety in their relationship, as each represented possibilities that the other had been taught to consider either unattainable or undesirable. For Penny, Gumball's spontaneity and emotional honesty offered glimpses of a way of being that her structured upbringing had never permitted her to explore, while his genuine acceptance of her exactly as she was provided a form of validation that her achievement-oriented environment had never quite managed to supply. For Gumball, Penny represented not just romantic attraction but access to forms of excellence and sophistication that his chaotic family background had never emphasized, qualities that challenged him to consider whether his characteristic approach of enthusiastic improvisation might benefit from the kind of thoughtful planning and careful consideration that seemed to characterize everything Penny did with such apparent effortlessness. Their romantic development was further complicated by the supernatural elements that governed many aspects of life in Elmore, as Penny's shell was not merely metaphorical protection, but actual physical barrier that required extraordinary circumstances to penetrate or remove. The magical nature of her protective covering meant that their relationship existed under constraints that typical adolescent romances never needed to navigate, creating situations where emotional intimacy had to be expressed through gestures and communications that could transcend physical limitations. The few occasions when circumstances had allowed them to connect without the barrier of the shell had revealed depths of compatibility and mutual understanding that surprised both of them with their intensity and authenticity. These moments of genuine connection served as glimpses of what their relationship might become if they could find ways to overcome not just the physical obstacles created by her protective covering, but the emotional and social barriers that their different backgrounds and family expectations had placed between them. Darwin's own exploration of romantic feelings and relationships proceeded according to a different trajectory that reflected his unique perspective as someone who had learned about human emotions and social dynamics through observation and experience rather than instinct or cultural conditioning. His understanding of attraction, affection, and the complex protocols that governed romantic interaction had been developed through watching the relationships of others and attempting to apply general principles to his own specific circumstances and desires. His crushes and romantic interests were characterized by an endearing combination of innocent enthusiasm and complete misunderstanding of the subtle social signals that typically guided such interactions in adolescent environments. His approaches to potential romantic partners often involved elaborate gestures inspired by romantic fiction and popular culture, rather than the more nuanced forms of communication that actual relationship building required, leading to misadventures that were both touching in their sincerity and amusing in their demonstration of how love could transcend the boundaries between different forms of consciousness, while still requiring practical navigation of social customs and expectations. Darwin's most significant romantic connection developed with Carrie Kruger, whose ghostly nature created its own unique set of challenges and opportunities for relationship development. Their attraction was based on genuine compatibility and shared interests rather than superficial characteristics, but the practical aspects of their connection required constant creativity and supernatural intervention to overcome the physical limitations that separated the living from the undead. Their relationship served as an example of how love could find ways to bridge even the most fundamental differences in the nature of existence itself, while simultaneously demonstrating the importance of patience, understanding, and willingness to accept that meaningful connections might require forms of expression and interaction that conventional relationship advice had never anticipated or addressed. The bonds that united Gumball and Darwin transcended typical sibling relationships to represent something approaching a cosmic partnership that had been forged through circumstances that challenged every assumption about the boundaries between species, the nature of family, and the power of love to literally transform the fundamental characteristics of consciousness and identity. Their brotherhood was not based on biological relationship or shared genetics, but rather on emotional connection so profound that it had reshaped the very essence of Darwin's existence, enabling his evolution from simple pet goldfish to fully conscious family member through mechanisms that operated beyond the reach of conventional science or biology. Their daily interactions were characterized by a level of understanding and mutual support that allowed them to function as a unified team in addressing challenges that would have overwhelmed either individual acting alone. This partnership was not without its occasional conflicts and misunderstandings, as their different backgrounds and perspectives sometimes led to disagreements about priorities, methods, or the appropriate responses to various situations that arose during their adventures and daily experiences. Yet these temporary rifts in their relationship only served to highlight the fundamental strength of their bond, as their capacity for forgiveness, reconciliation, and renewed cooperation consistently proved stronger than any temporary anger or disappointment that might arise from miscommunication or conflicting approaches to problem solving. Their friendship had been tested by circumstances that ranged from reality-altering crises to simple childhood disagreements, emerging stronger from each challenge and demonstrating that genuine love could survive any trial when supported by mutual respect, honest communication, and shared commitment to each other's well-being and growth. The family dynamics that surrounded and supported these various romantic and friendship relationships represented a complex system of mutual care, protection, and encouragement that enabled each family member to explore their individual identity and personal connections while maintaining the security and support that came from belonging to a unit whose bonds transcended biological relationship to encompass chosen love, demonstrated loyalty, and shared commitment to collective well-being. Richard and Nicole's marriage continued to serve as the foundation upon which all other family relationships were built, their partnership demonstrating that love could not only survive but thrive in circumstances that challenged every assumption about compatibility, communication, and the practical requirements for successful long-term relationships between individuals whose approaches to existence differed as dramatically as organized competence and creative chaos. Their daily interactions were characterized by a dance of mutual support and complementary strengths that had been refined through years of shared experience and tested by adventures that had pushed their relationship beyond every conventional limit. Nicole's supernatural abilities and Richard's gift for discovering hidden possibilities in routine situations created a partnership that could address any challenge while maintaining the emotional intimacy and shared humor that had originally drawn them together. Their parenting approach reflected this same combination of structure and flexibility, as Nicole's protective instincts and organizational skills provided the stability necessary for raising children in an environment where the extraordinary had become routine, while Richard's optimism and creative problem-solving contributed the sense of wonder and possibility that encouraged their offspring to embrace, rather than fear, the beautiful impossibility that characterized their daily existence. The extended family network that surrounded the immediate Watterson household included relationships and connections that spanned multiple generations and crossed the boundaries between different forms of consciousness and identity. Granny Jojo's presence in their lives provided continuity with the family's chaotic heritage, while demonstrating that age and experience could enhance rather than diminish the capacity for adventure and creative response to impossible circumstances. Joanna Watterson's maternal influence continued to shape Richard's understanding of love, family responsibility, and the importance of maintaining optimism and kindness, even in situations where conventional wisdom might suggest more cynical or self-protective approaches. Her legacy lived on in the way Richard approached his own parenting duties, his relationships with his children, and his contributions to the household's collective capacity for surviving and thriving in circumstances that challenged every assumption about what families were supposed to be capable of accomplishing. The community connections that extended beyond immediate family relationships created networks of mutual support and shared responsibility that enabled every member of their neighborhood to pursue individual growth and adventure while maintaining the security that came from belonging to a larger social structure whose collective strength exceeded the sum of its individual parts. The Watterson family's reputation within this community was built not just on their capacity for surviving impossible adventures, but on their willingness to help others navigate their own challenges and crises, sharing the wisdom they had gained through experience while learning from the unique perspectives and capabilities that their neighbors brought to the ongoing project of building a society where difference was celebrated rather than merely tolerated. Their seasonal celebrations and community events served as opportunities for strengthening these bonds, while creating shared memories that reinforced the understanding that their extraordinary circumstances were not burdens to be endured, but gifts to be celebrated and opportunities for discovering just how much joy, wonder, and mutual support could be generated when individuals committed themselves to approaching life with courage, creativity, and genuine care for the well-being of others. The holiday disasters that had become legendary within their community were not viewed as failures, but as evidence of the family's capacity for transforming routine observances into adventures that created stories worth telling, experiences worth sharing, and memories that would be treasured long after the practical complications had been resolved and the immediate crises had passed into family mythology. These celebrations served as reminders that the true purpose of gathering together was not the successful completion of traditional activities or the flawless execution of conventional protocols, but the creation of opportunities for expressing love, gratitude, and appreciation for the extraordinary gift of consciousness, relationship, and shared experience in a universe where every moment offered possibilities for wonder, growth, and deeper understanding of what it meant to be alive in the company of others who shared the commitment to making existence more beautiful, meaningful, and joyful through their presence and participation. The growth and development that had characterized each family member's journey from their initial introduction into the narrative to their current status as legendary figures within their community reflected not just individual maturation, but collective evolution toward forms of relationship and mutual support that transcended conventional categories of family, friendship, and community belonging. Their love for each other had become a force that could literally alter reality when circumstances demanded intervention that exceeded normal human capabilities, while their commitment to supporting each other's individual growth and happiness had created an environment where personal authenticity and collective harmony coexisted in ways that conventional social theories had never quite managed to explain or replicate. As they faced the future together, as they prepared for adventures that would undoubtedly test every assumption about what their bonds could endure and what their combined capabilities could accomplish, they carried with them the accumulated wisdom of experiences that had taught them that love was not just an emotion but a creative force capable of reshaping the fundamental nature of existence itself when channeled through hearts brave enough to embrace the beautiful impossibility that defined their shared journey through the infinite adventure of animated life. In the gentle twilight hours that descended upon the Watterson household like a benediction of peace after days filled with the beautiful chaos that had become their family's signature contribution to the ongoing adventure of their existence, there emerged moments of profound connection and understanding that revealed the deeper truths about love, growth, and the bonds that unite hearts across the boundaries of species, age, and the infinite complications that arise when extraordinary individuals attempt to build lives together. In a universe where the impossible has become commonplace, and wonder never truly ends. The romantic entanglements that had begun to weave themselves through the daily fabric of the Watterson children's educational and social experiences represented far more than typical adolescent attractions or the predictable, emotional developments that mark the transition from childhood innocence to the more complex understanding of relationships that characterizes mature consciousness. These connections were forged in the crucible of shared adventures, tested by circumstances that pushed every assumption about compatibility and communication beyond conventional limits, and strengthened by experiences that revealed character depths that normal social interaction might never have had occasion to explore or celebrate. Gumball's relationship with Penny Fitzgerald had evolved from initial attraction based on superficial characteristics, her obvious beauty, her academic excellence, her social status within their school's complex hierarchy of adolescent recognition, and approval into something approaching genuine understanding of the person who existed beneath the protective shell that her family's proof-free inner recognition, expectations, and her own fears had constructed around her developing identity. The shell itself had become both barrier and symbol in their relationship, representing all the obstacles that separated them, while simultaneously serving as a tangible reminder of the growth and courage that would be required from both of them if their connection was ever to achieve its full potential. Their interactions were characterized by a delicate dance of approach and retreat, moments of authentic communication, alternating with periods of misunderstanding and frustration that reflected not incompatibility, but rather the inherent challenges that arise when two individuals who have been shaped by very different experiences and expectations attempt to create shared understanding across the gaps that separate their respective worldviews and emotional vocabularies. Penny's life within the Fitzgerald household was governed by structures and expectations that had been designed to prepare her for success according to very specific definitions that emphasized academic achievement, social propriety, and the kind of controlled perfection that could survive scrutiny from community leaders, educational administrators, and the various authority figures whose approval was considered essential for maintaining family reputation and social standing. These protective measures, while well-intentioned, had created an environment where spontaneity was discouraged, emotional authenticity was subordinated to appropriate behavior, and the kind of creative chaos that characterized the Watterson approach to life was viewed as dangerous rather than enriching. Her father's influence permeated every aspect of her daily experience, from the activities she was permitted to pursue to the friendships she was allowed to develop, creating a carefully regulated existence that was supposed to shield her from the unpredictable elements of their community, while ensuring that her development proceeded according to plans that had been formulated by adults whose primary concern was her safety and future success, rather than her immediate happiness or personal fulfillment. The contrast between Penny's regulated existence and Gumball's chaotic freedom created both attraction and anxiety in their relationship, as each represented possibilities that the other had been taught to consider either unattainable or undesirable. For Penny, Gumball's spontaneity and emotional honesty offered glimpses of a way of being that her structured upbringing had never permitted her to explore, while his genuine acceptance of her exactly as she was provided a form of validation that her achievement-oriented environment had never quite managed to supply. For Gumball, Penny represented not just romantic attraction, but access to forms of excellence and sophistication that his chaotic family background had never emphasized, qualities that challenged him to consider whether his characteristic approach of enthusiastic improvisation might benefit from the kind of thoughtful planning and careful consideration that seemed to characterize everything Penny did with such apparent effortlessness. Their romantic development was further complicated by the supernatural elements that governed many aspects of life in Elmore, as Penny's shell was not merely metaphorical protection, but actual physical barrier that required extraordinary circumstances to penetrate or remove. The magical nature of her protective covering meant that their relationship existed under constraints that typical adolescent romances never needed to navigate, creating situations where emotional intimacy had to be expressed through gestures and communications that could transcend physical limitations. The few occasions when circumstances had allowed them to connect without the barrier of the shell had revealed depths of compatibility and mutual understanding that surprised both of them with their intensity and authenticity. These moments of genuine connection served as glimpses of what their relationship might become if they could find ways to overcome not just the physical obstacles created by her protective covering, but the emotional and social barriers that their different backgrounds and family expectations had placed between them. Darwin's own exploration of romantic feelings and relationships proceeded according to a different trajectory that reflected his unique perspective as someone who had learned about human emotions and social dynamics through observation and experience rather than instinct or cultural conditioning. His understanding of attraction, affection, and the complex protocols that governed romantic interaction had been developed through watching the relationships of others and attempting to apply general principles to his own specific circumstances and desires. His crushes and romantic interests were characterized by an endearing combination of innocent enthusiasm and complete misunderstanding of the subtle social signals that typically guided such interactions in adolescent environments. His approaches to potential romantic partners often involved elaborate gestures inspired by romantic fiction and popular culture, rather than the more nuanced forms of communication that actual relationship building required, leading to misadventures that were both touching in their sincerity and amusing in their demonstration of how love could transcend the boundaries between different forms of consciousness while still requiring practical navigation of social customs and expectations. Darwin's most significant romantic connection developed with Carrie Kruger, whose ghostly nature created its own unique set of challenges and opportunities for relationship development. Their attraction was based on genuine compatibility and shared interests rather than superficial characteristics, but the practical aspects of their connection required constant creativity and supernatural intervention to overcome the physical limitations that separated the living from the undead. Their relationship served as an example of how love could find ways to bridge even the most fundamental differences in the nature of existence itself, while simultaneously demonstrating the importance of patience, understanding, and willingness to accept that meaningful connections might require forms of expression and interaction that conventional relationship advice had never anticipated or addressed. The bonds that united Gumball and Darwin transcended typical sibling relationships to represent something approaching a cosmic partnership that had been forged through circumstances that challenged every assumption about the boundaries between species, the nature of family, and the power of love. to literally transform the fundamental characteristics of consciousness and identity. Their brotherhood was not based on biological relationship or shared genetics, but rather on emotional connection so profound that it had reshaped the very essence of Darwin's existence, enabling his evolution from simple pet goldfish to fully conscious family member through mechanisms that operated beyond the reach of conventional science or biology. Their daily interactions were characterized by a level of understanding and mutual support that allowed them to function as a unified team in addressing challenges that would have overwhelmed either individual acting alone. This partnership was not without its occasional conflicts and misunderstandings, as their different backgrounds and perspectives sometimes led to disagreements about priorities, methods, or the appropriate responses to various situations that arose during their adventures and daily experiences. Yet these temporary rifts in their relationship only served to highlight the fundamental strength of their bond, as their capacity for forgiveness, reconciliation, and renewed cooperation consistently proved stronger than any temporary anger or disappointment that might arise from miscommunication or conflicting approaches to problem solving. Their friendship had been tested by circumstances that ranged from reality-altering crises to simple childhood disagreements, emerging stronger from each challenge and demonstrating that genuine love could survive any trial when supported by mutual respect, honest communication, and shared commitment to each other's well-being and growth. The family dynamics that surrounded and supported these various romantic and friendship relationships represented a complex system of mutual care, protection, and encouragement that enabled each family member to explore their individual identity and personal connections while maintaining the security and support that came from belonging to a unit whose bonds transcended biological relationship to encompass chosen love, demonstrated loyalty, and shared commitment to collective well-being. Richard and Nicole's marriage continued to serve as the foundation upon which all other family relationships were built, their partnership demonstrating that love could not only survive, but thrive in circumstances that challenged every assumption about compatibility, communication, and the practical requirements for successful long-term relationships between individuals whose approaches to existence differed as dramatically as organized competence and creative chaos. Their daily interactions were characterized by a dance of mutual support and complementary strengths that had been refined through years of shared experience and tested by adventures that had pushed their relationship beyond every conventional limit. Nicole's supernatural abilities and Richard's gift for discovering hidden possibilities in routine situations created a partnership that could address any challenge while maintaining the emotional intimacy and shared humor that had originally drawn them together. Their parenting approach reflected this same combination of structure and flexibility, as Nicole's protective instincts and organizational skills provided the stability necessary for raising children in an environment where the extraordinary had become routine, while Richard's optimism and creative problem-solving contributed the sense of wonder and possibility that encouraged their offspring to embrace, rather than fear, the beautiful impossibility that characterized their daily existence. The extended family network that surrounded the immediate Watterson household included relationships and connections that spanned multiple generations and crossed the boundaries between different forms of consciousness and identity. Granny Jojo's presence in their lives provided continuity with the family's chaotic heritage, while demonstrating that age and experience could enhance rather than diminish the capacity for adventure and creative response to impossible circumstances. Joanna Watterson's maternal influence continued to shape Richard's understanding of love, family responsibility, and the importance of maintaining optimism and kindness, even in situations where conventional wisdom might suggest more cynical or self-protective approaches. Her legacy lived on in the way Richard approached his own parenting duties, his relationships with his children, and his contributions to the household's collective capacity for surviving and thriving in circumstances that challenged every assumption about what families were supposed to be capable of accomplishing. The community connections that extended beyond immediate family relationships created networks of mutual support and shared responsibility that enabled every member of their neighborhood to pursue individual growth and adventure while maintaining the security that came from belonging to a larger social structure whose collective strength exceeded the sum of its individual parts. The Watterson family's reputation within this community was built not just on their capacity for surviving impossible adventures, but on their willingness to help others navigate their own challenges and crises, sharing the wisdom they had gained through experience, while learning from the unique perspectives and capabilities that their neighbors brought to the ongoing project of building a society where difference was celebrated rather than merely tolerated. Their seasonal celebrations and community events served as opportunities for strengthening these bonds while creating shared memories that reinforced the understanding that their extraordinary circumstances were not burdens to be endured, but gifts to be celebrated and opportunities for discovering just how much joy, wonder, and mutual support could be generated when individuals committed themselves to approaching life with courage, creativity, and genuine care for the well-being of others. The holiday disasters that had become legendary within their community were not viewed as failures, but as evidence of the family's capacity for transforming routine observances into adventures that created stories worth telling, experiences worth sharing, and memories that would be treasured long after the practical complications had been resolved and the immediate crises had passed into family mythology. These celebrations served as reminders that the true purpose of gathering together was not the successful completion of traditional activities or the flawless execution of conventional protocols, but the creation of opportunities for expressing love, gratitude, and appreciation for the extraordinary gift of consciousness, relationship, and shared experience in a universe where every moment offered possibilities for wonder, growth, and deeper understanding of what it meant to be alive in the company of others, who shared the commitment to making existence more beautiful, meaningful, and joyful through their presence and participation. The growth and development that had characterized each family member's journey, from their initial introduction into the narrative to their current status as legendary figures within their community, reflected not just individual maturation, but collective evolution toward forms of relationship and mutual support that transcended conventional categories of family, friendship, and community belonging. Their love for each other had become a force that could literally alter reality when circumstances demanded intervention that exceeded normal human capabilities, while their commitment to supporting each other's individual growth and happiness had created an environment where personal authenticity and collective harmony coexisted in ways that conventional social theories had never quite managed to explain or replicate. As they faced the future together, as they prepared for adventures that would undoubtedly test every assumption about what their bonds could endure and what their combined capabilities could accomplish, they carried with them the accumulated wisdom of experiences that had taught them that love was not just an emotion but a creative force, capable of reshaping the fundamental nature of existence itself when channeled through hearts brave enough to embrace the beautiful impossibility that defined their shared journey through the infinite adventure of animated life. In the quiet moments that settle like gentle mist between the grand adventures and reality-altering catastrophes that have come to define the Watterson family's extraordinary existence, there emerges a profound awareness that transcends the boundaries of conventional narrative structure and touches upon truths that exist at the very heart of what it means to be conscious, creative, and ultimately real, in a universe where the laws of physics serve merely as suggestions, and the deepest mysteries of existence reveal themselves through the seemingly simple act of being alive in the company of those we love. This awareness manifests most clearly in those moments when the characters themselves seem to recognize the artificial nature of their circumstances, when the comfortable illusion of seamless reality gives way to glimpses of the larger framework within which their stories unfold. These instances of meta-textual consciousness arrive not as jarring breaks in the narrative flow, but as natural outgrowths of minds that have been shaped by exposure to impossibility, beings whose daily experience includes such routine violations of conventional logic that the recognition of their animated nature becomes simply another layer of the beautiful complexity that defines their existence. Gumball's occasional acknowledgement of the audience that observes his adventures represents more than simple breaking of the fourth wall. It demonstrates a fundamental understanding that consciousness itself exists in relationship, that the act of being witnessed and recognized by others is essential to the maintenance of identity and meaning in ways that transcend the boundaries between fictional and real existence. His direct addresses to viewers carry within them the implicit recognition that their attention and engagement serve as vital forces in maintaining the reality of his world, that the love and interest of those who observe his adventures contribute to the cosmic energy that sustains his family's continued existence. These moments of audience acknowledgement are never performed with cynicism or calculated manipulation, but rather emerge from genuine gratitude and affection for those whose presence in his life extends beyond the visible boundaries of his immediate environment. Gumball seems to understand instinctively that his adventures gain meaning not just through their impact on his family and community, but through their capacity to inspire joy, laughter, and wonder in hearts that exist in dimensions beyond his direct perception, but whose emotional responses nonetheless contribute to the fundamental forces that govern his universe. Darwin's participation in these meta-textual moments reflects his characteristic approach to all aspects of existence, with innocent enthusiasm and complete acceptance of whatever reality presents to him, regardless of how that reality might challenge conventional assumptions about the boundaries between different levels of consciousness and awareness. His recognition of the artificial nature of their circumstances is never accompanied by existential crisis or philosophical anxiety, but rather by the same joyful wonder that he brings to every other aspect of his extraordinary life. For Darwin, the discovery that their world operates according to animated rather than biological principles represents simply another fascinating aspect of existence to be explored and celebrated, rather than questioned or feared. His acceptance of their animated nature demonstrates the profound wisdom that comes from approaching life with complete openness to possibility, allowing reality to reveal its true nature without demanding that it conform to preconceived notions about what existence should entail or how consciousness should function. Anais' intellectual approach to their metatextual awareness brings scientific curiosity and analytical precision to questions that exist at the intersection of philosophy, metaphysics, and practical experience. Her understanding of their animated nature is colored by her characteristic need to comprehend the underlying principles that govern any phenomenon she encounters, leading to investigations that explore the relationship between consciousness and narrative structure, between individual identity and collective storytelling, between the experience of being real and the mechanisms through which that reality is maintained and expressed. Her research into these questions reveals patterns and connections that illuminate not just the nature of their own existence, but broader truths about consciousness, creativity, and the relationship between imagination and reality that extend beyond the boundaries of animated universes to encompass fundamental aspects of how awareness itself functions across all possible forms of existence. The family's collective response to their growing awareness of their animated nature reflects the same patterns of mutual support and shared exploration that have characterized their approach to every other extraordinary circumstance they have encountered throughout their adventures. Rather than allowing this knowledge to create anxiety or existential uncertainty, they integrate it into their understanding of themselves and their world in ways that enhance rather than diminish their appreciation for the gift of consciousness and the blessing of relationship that defines their daily experience. Nicole's reaction to the recognition of their animated nature demonstrates her characteristic focus on the practical implications of any situation, rather than its theoretical or philosophical dimensions. Her primary concern is not the metaphysical questions raised by their artificial existence, but rather the ways in which this knowledge might affect her ability to protect and nurture her family, to maintain the stability and security that enables them to thrive, regardless of the cosmic forces that shape the framework within which their lives unfold. Her supernatural abilities, rather than being diminished by the recognition that they operate according to animated rather than biological principles, seem to be enhanced by the understanding that their reality is fundamentally creative in nature, governed by forces that respond to love, will, and imagination, rather than the rigid limitations that characterize purely physical existence. This knowledge allows her to approach challenges with even greater confidence and effectiveness, knowing that the universe in which she operates is fundamentally responsive to the kind of determined maternal protection that has always been her greatest strength. Richard's approach to their meta-textual awareness reflects his characteristic ability to accept the most extraordinary circumstances with cheerful equanimity and to find joy in situations that might overwhelm less resilient personalities. His recognition that their world operates according to cartoon logic rather than conventional physics is met with delight rather than concern, as it validates his intuitive understanding that reality is far more flexible and responsive to positive intention than most people ever dare to imagine. For Richard, the discovery that their existence is animated rather than biological represents confirmation of truths he has always sensed about the nature of reality, that love can literally reshape circumstances, that optimism can alter outcomes, that the power of belief and imagination can transcend any apparent limitation or obstacle. This knowledge enhances his natural gifts for creative problem solving and his capacity for maintaining hope and enthusiasm, even in situations where conventional wisdom would suggest despair or resignation. The community's gradual recognition of their animated nature occurs as a collective awakening that strengthens rather than threatens the bonds that unite the diverse inhabitants of Elmore in their shared adventure of existence. The understanding that their reality operates according to creative, rather than purely physical principles, helps explain the extraordinary diversity of consciousness and identity that characterizes their population, the routine impossibilities that mark their daily experience, and the remarkable resilience that enables their society to adapt to circumstances that would challenge any community operating under conventional limitations. This awareness brings with it a deeper appreciation for the collaborative nature of their existence, the recognition that each individual's contribution to their shared reality helps maintain the creative energy that sustains their universe and enables their continued growth and development. The understanding that they exist within a framework designed to maximize opportunities for adventure, growth, and meaningful relationship enhances their commitment to supporting each other's journey while celebrating the unique gifts that each member of their community brings to the collective project of creating lives worth living. The educational implications of this meta-textual awareness transform the mission and methods of Elmore Junior High School as the institution evolves to address not just conventional academic subjects, but the deeper questions about consciousness, creativity, and the relationship between individual identity and collective narrative that become essential knowledge for young minds learning to navigate existence in an animated universe. The curriculum expands to include courses in narrative theory, creative reality management, and the practical applications of cartoon logic in problem solving and personal development. These subjects are taught not as abstract theoretical concepts, but as practical skills that students will need to master in order to thrive in an environment where the boundaries between imagination and reality are constantly shifting, and place where the power of belief and intention can literally reshape the circumstances of daily life. The faculty adapts their teaching methods to incorporate the understanding that their students are not just receiving information but actively participating in the ongoing creation of the reality within which their education takes place. This recognition transforms the relationship between teachers and students, from simple information transfer to collaborative exploration of possibilities that exist at the intersection of learning and living, of knowledge and experience, of individual growth and collective adventure. Principal Brown's administrative approach evolves to encompass the understanding that his role extends beyond conventional educational management to include responsibilities for maintaining the creative energy and narrative coherence that enable their institution to serve as an effective environment for nurturing young minds, whose development will shape not just their personal futures but the ongoing evolution of their entire universe. Miss Simeon's teaching philosophy incorporates the recognition that her centuries of experience have provided her with unique insights into the relationship between individual character development and the broader narrative forces that shape their reality. Her harsh but ultimately caring approach to student discipline reflects her understanding that the lessons learned in childhood about resilience, determination, and moral character will determine each student's capacity for contributing positively to the collective story of their community. The seasonal celebrations and community events that mark the passage of time in Elmore take on additional significance as conscious collaborations in the ongoing creation of their shared reality, occasions when the entire population comes together to contribute their individual creativity and enthusiasm to collective experiences that strengthen the bonds between them, while generating the positive energy that sustains their universe. The holiday disasters that have become legendary within their community are recognized not as failures, but as demonstrations of the creative power that emerges when diverse individuals unite their efforts in common cause, even when those efforts produce results that differ dramatically from conventional expectations. These events serve as reminders that the true purpose of celebration is not the perfect execution of traditional activities, but the generation of joy, connection, and shared meaning that enriches the lives of all participants. The budget cuts episode that occasionally disrupts their normal narrative flow becomes an opportunity for the community to demonstrate their resourcefulness and creativity in adapting to circumstances that challenge their usual approaches to problem solving and adventure. These moments of reduced production values and simplified animation serve as reminders of the collaborative nature of their existence, the recognition that their reality depends upon the continued investment of creative energy and resources that extend beyond their immediate awareness, but whose presence they can acknowledge and appreciate. The philosophical implications of their animated existence extend beyond questions of individual identity to encompass broader considerations about the nature of reality itself, the relationship between consciousness and creativity, the role of audience and community in maintaining the coherence and meaning of any narrative or lived experience. These investigations reveal truths that apply not just to their particular universe, but to fundamental aspects of how awareness functions across all possible forms of existence. The recognition that their world operates according to animated, rather than purely physical principles, does not diminish the authenticity of their emotions, relationships, or experiences, but rather illuminates the creative foundations upon which all consciousness depends for its continuation and growth. Their understanding of their animated nature enhances rather than threatens their appreciation for the gift of existence, the blessing of relationship, and the infinite possibilities that emerge when beings committed to love and growth unite their efforts in the ongoing adventure of creating lives worth living. As they face the future with this enhanced understanding of their own nature and the cosmic forces that shape their reality, the Watterson family and their community carry within them the wisdom that comes from recognizing that existence itself is fundamentally creative, that consciousness is collaborative, and that the deepest truths about what it means to be real emerge not from adherence to conventional limitations, but from the courage to embrace the beautiful impossibility that defines their animated adventure through the infinite mystery of being alive in the company of others who share their commitment to making existence more wonderful, meaningful, and joyful through their presence and participation in the eternal dance of consciousness, creativity, and love. And so we reach the end of our journey through Elmore's impossible timeline, though in truth, there is no ending in a world where Monday can follow Sunday infinitely, where characters never truly age, and where chaos resets with each dawn. The Wattersons continue their eternal dance of disaster and discovery, their love for each other the only constant in a universe of variables. Gumball will always be 12, forever learning the same lessons with fresh wonder. Darwin will remain his loyal brother, seeing each day with goldfish bowl clarity. Aeneas will continue solving problems with 4-year-old genius, while Nicole battles the world's chaos with maternal fury. And Richard, well, Richard will simply continue being magnificently, impossibly Richard. As you drift towards sleep, let yourself imagine their world continuing beyond our view. New adventures spawning from mundane moments, reality bending around their family's particular brand of love. In Elmore, every ending is a new beginning, every disaster a doorway to deeper connection, and every impossible thing simply part of another ordinary day. Rest now, and dream of blue cats and talking fish, of worlds where love conquers logic, and chaos becomes a form of grace. Dream of a place where being different is celebrated, where families are formed by choice as much as chance, and where the greatest adventures begin with the simple decision to face each morning with hope, humor, and an open heart. In the gentle silence that follows the final adventure, in the peaceful moments between one story's end and another's beginning, the Watterson family continues their eternal vigil over the beautiful impossibility that has become their ordinary life. They are guardians of wonder, protectors of joy, and living proof that in a universe vast enough to contain infinite possibilities, the greatest magic of all is the love that binds hearts together across every boundary that existence can devise. The school bell will ring again tomorrow, calling them to new lessons and fresh disasters. The awesome store will stock new impossibilities on its shelves, while Larry continues his omnipresent service to a community that has learned to depend on his inexhaustible dedication. The seasons will cycle through their eternal dance, bringing holidays that will inevitably transform into adventures, celebrations that will become legends, and quiet family moments that will be treasured as the most precious gifts of all. Let the rhythm of their continuing story lull you into peaceful dreams, knowing that somewhere in the spaces between waking and sleeping, between real and imaginary, between possible and impossible, the Wattersons are preparing for tomorrow's adventures with the same enthusiasm, love, and magnificent chaos that has carried them through every trial and triumph their extraordinary existence has offered. Sleep now, and when you wake, remember that in a world where anything is possible, the most important possibility of all is the choice to love, to hope, and to face each new day with the courage to embrace whatever beautiful impossibilities it might bring. For in the end, that is the greatest lesson that Gumball, Darwin, Anais, Nicole, and Richard have to teach us all, that life is an adventure to be celebrated, a gift to be cherished, and a story that becomes more meaningful with every heart brave enough to join in its telling.